Family comes first, my dad said. Then missed my wedding to console my 29-year-old sister. So I blocked him and sent a copy of my vows. I never imagined that my enjoyment could cause problems for others, but I guess I was mistaken. The whole thing began last spring, when I took Della to my father's birthday dinner, and I should have recognized the warning signs straight away, but I was too preoccupied with how fantastic things were going in my life to notice the storm rising around me. Ethan and I had been dating for approximately 8 months at the time, and things were going well between us. It felt natural and simple, like if we just fit together without having to force anything or walk on eggshells around each other. He made me laugh every day, and he truly listened when I talked about my job, hobbies, or whatever strange topic was on my mind. And he never made me feel like I was too much, not enough, or anything other than who I was meant to be. We'd talk for hours about everything and nothing, and even the silent moments felt natural, rather than unpleasant. I found myself looking forward to seeing him every day, in a manner I'd never felt with anyone before. So, when my father's 55th birthday arrived, I was delighted to introduce Ethan to more of my family, as he'd already met my mother and stepfather a few weeks before, and they adored him. My mother kept emailing me afterwards about how courteous and humorous he was, and how she could tell how happy he made me just by the way I smiled when I saw him. My stepfather actually asked Della if he wanted to go fishing with him the following weekend, which was essentially his approval, because he typically takes forever to warm up to new people. But my father's side of the family was different, and I knew that from the start, because there was always drama or tension whenever we all got together, generally centered around my half-sister Jenna, who was 28 but acted like she was 16 most of the time. Jenna had a habit of falling head over heels for guys who were clearly not right for her, like the married co-worker who dragged her along for 6 months before ghosting her, or the guy who was still living with his ex-girlfriend but claimed they were just roommates, or the one who borrowed $3,000 from her and then blocked her phone number when she asked for it back. Every time Jenna was involved in one of these disasters, she'd call my father and stepmother and cry about how she couldn't understand why this was happening to her, and they'd drop everything to rush over to her apartment with ice cream and tissues and reassurances that it wasn't her fault and she just had bad luck with men. They'd spend hours going over every text message and chat, trying to figure out what went wrong and how she could avoid it next time. And then they'd slam the guy in front of everybody who would listen, claiming that Jenna deserved so much better than these losers who didn't see her as an incredible woman. The problem was that Jenna never learned anything from these experiences, since my father and stepmother were always there to fix things for her instead of allowing her to face the consequences of her actions. They'd pay her rent when she wasted her grocery money on extravagant gifts for the person she was pursuing, and they'd co-sign loans when her credit was ruined by all the financial blunders she made while trying to impress men who didn't care about her. They'd even let her move back into their house when things were very nasty, which happened at least twice a year on a regular basis. So, when I came into my father's birthday dinner, holding Delpha's hand and smiling because I was actually thrilled to be with him, I assumed everyone would be relieved to see me doing well for once. I'd had my fair share of relationship disasters in my early 20s, including a 2-year engagement that ended when my fiancé decided he wasn't ready for marriage after all, and I'd spent a lot of time alone and working on myself before meeting Della, so I assumed my folks would be pleased that I had found someone who treated me well. But the mood at the restaurant felt strange from the time we sat down, and I couldn't figure out what was wrong at first, because everyone was courteous and asking Ethan the standard getting-to-know-you questions about his profession, hometown, and how we met. Della was being his normal charming self, sharing humorous anecdotes about his profession as a physical therapist and asking thoughtful questions about everyone else's lives, and I could tell my father enjoyed him, despite his attempts to keep things cool. Jenna was also there, and she'd just been dumped the week before by a guy she met on a dating app who turned out to be using images from 5 years ago and lying about almost everything on his site. She'd been texting me all week about how much of a nightmare the whole thing had been, how she couldn't believe she'd wasted 2 months talking to this person who wasn't even real, and how she was beginning to believe there were no good men left in the world and that she should just get a bunch of cats and stop dating altogether. I tried to be sympathetic while she told me all of this, but honestly, I was tired of having the same talk with her about how she kept getting involved with obviously problematic individuals and then appearing surprised when things didn't work out. I never said it to her explicitly because I didn't want to be mean, but I was beginning to believe that she needed to take a break from dating and figure out why she continued making the same mistakes, rather than simply repeating the same patterns with various people. Anyway, Jenna was sitting across from me at dinner, looking terrible and picking at her food while everyone else was having normal conversations, and I felt awful for her because breakups are always painful, even when you should have expected them. But then Ethan began recounting a tale about one of his patients, an old man who was learning to walk again after hip surgery, and how motivated and cheerful he was despite the fact that the recovery was extremely difficult. I was smiling at the funny moments and simply enjoying listening to him speak since he was such a terrific storyteller. That's when my stepmother Karen mentioned how lovely it must be to be so carefree and cheerful all the time, and something in her tone had me look up from my food to see what she meant. She was looking at me with an expression I couldn't interpret, but it wasn't friendly, and I noticed Jenna had tears in her eyes and was looking down at her plate, as if she was trying not to cry. I felt bad because I hadn't considered how Jenna could react to my delight during a difficult time, so I tried to change the subject and asked her about her new work. But she merely shrugged and said that was all right, without elaborating. The rest of supper was unpleasant after that, with strange silences and forced chatter, and I kept noticing Karen and my father exchanging glances. Della and I departed as soon as we could respectfully, and on the way home, he inquired whether everything was all right because the atmosphere had turned peculiar near the end. I told him about Jenna's recent breakup and how I felt I'd been insensitive by being overly happy when she was down, and Ethan said he understood, but I shouldn't have to hide the fact that I was in a good relationship just to make other people feel better about their problems. I assumed that was the end of it, but the next morning, Karen texted me asking if we could talk. So I contacted her, thinking she wanted to talk about what happened at dinner and hopefully clear the air. But instead, she launched into a lengthy spiel about how she had been studying my conduct recently and was concerned that I was being insensitive to Jenna's troubles by flaunting my relationship in front of her while she was going through such a tough time. I was perplexed since I hadn't realized I was flaunting anything, and I told Karen that I was simply being myself and sharing my life with my family in the same manner I usually did. But she stated that bringing Ethan to family functions, talking about our relationship, and seeming so obviously pleased harmed Jenna, who was already unhappy with herself and her dating life, and that I needed to be more careful of her feelings. I asked Karen what she wanted me to do about it, and she said that I should tone down the public displays of affection and avoid talking about Ethan so much when Jenna was around, as well as try to be more supportive of Jenna instead of focusing solely on my own happiness. I mentioned that I had been supportive of Jenna throughout her relationship drama over the years, and that I had listened to her rant about her troubles numerous times without making it about me or my own relationships. But Karen said that wasn't the same thing, and that Jenna needed extra support from her family right now because she was going through a particularly difficult dating period, and that it would mean a lot to her if I could just be more sensitive around her until she got back on her feet. I said I'd try to be more careful of how I came across, but I didn't think it was fair to expect me to hide my happiness or pretend my relationship wasn't going well simply to save Jenna's feelings. That conversation bugged me for days afterward because something about it felt strange, but I couldn't pinpoint what was wrong with Karen's reasoning. I discussed it with Ethan, and he said it sounded like they were asking me to shrink myself to meet Jenna's difficulties, which was unhealthy for everyone involved. But I didn't want to upset my family, so I tried to be more discreet about my connection when I was with them, even if it seemed strange and artificial. The next family event was my cousin's graduation party a few weeks later, which I attended alone because Della had to work that weekend. Karen and my father, however, continued to give me strange looks whenever I smiled or laughed at someone's joke. Jenna was there with a new guy she'd started seeing, who was nice enough at first, but as the afternoon progressed, it became clear that he was one of those individuals who believes he's wiser than everyone else and must correct or dispute anything anyone says in conversation. I noticed Jenna hanging on every word this guy said, even when he was being condescending to others, and I could see my father and Karen exchanging concerned looks, but they didn't say anything to her about it at the moment. Instead, after the party, Karen approached me and said she'd noticed that I was much more comfortable and pleasant when Della wasn't present, and that it might be best if I attended family occasions alone for a while, until Jenna settled into her new relationship. I was startled because that was not what we had agreed on at all, and I informed Karen that I thought we were only talking about my being more sensitive, not completely removing Delta from family events. But she stated that his presence seemed to make things harder for Jenna, that it would only be temporary, until she felt more sure about her own dating life, and that it would really benefit the family dynamic if I could just go along with it for the time being. I answered no, since Ethan was my partner, and I was not going to treat him like a filthy secret just because Jenna couldn't stand seeing other people in happy relationships. Karen became indignant, saying I was being selfish by putting my own desires ahead of my sister's mental well-being, and that if I truly cared about Jenna, I would be prepared to make this modest sacrifice to help her get through a difficult period. But it didn't feel tiny to me, and I informed Karen that Jenna was 28 years old and needed to learn how to cope with her own difficulties rather than asking everyone else to restructure their lives around her emotions. Karen said that I was being unkind and unsympathetic, and that Jenna had always suffered with relationships and required support from her family rather than judgment and condemnation. I remembered that Jenna was still struggling because my father and Karen never let her face the repercussions of her poor decisions, and that constantly swooping in to rescue her or make everyone else accommodate her problems was not helping her develop or learn anything. Karen thought that was a terrible thing to say about my own sister, and she couldn't believe I was being so cold and selfish when Jenna needed me the most. Karen accused me of being envious of the attention Jenna received from my father, and I pointed out that I was attempting to live my own independent adult life, rather than continuously causing problems that necessitated family intervention. By the end, we were both fairly furious, and Karen suggested that I take some time to consider what kind of sister and daughter I wanted to be, and that I was welcome to return to family activities when I was ready to be more supportive and less self-centered. I left feeling like, because I couldn't see how wanting to bring my boyfriend to family functions made me selfish or unsupportive. I'd been patient with Jenna's ongoing relationship catastrophes for years, and I'd never made her feel guilty about her decisions, even when they were obviously awful ones that anyone could see coming from a mile away. When I informed Della what had happened, he was upset on my behalf, claiming that my family was being utterly unfair and deceitful. He said it sounded like they had an unhealthy relationship in which Jenna became the focus of attention anytime she had a problem, and anyone who didn't engage in that drama was seen as nasty or unsupportive, which wasn't fair to me. I didn't hear from my father or Karen for nearly 2 weeks following the incident, which was uncommon because we usually spoke or texted at least once a week. I was waiting for one of them to apologize or at least try to work something out, but my phone remained silent, except for sporadic texts from Jenna, whining about her new boyfriend and how he was beginning to show his true colors. Finally, my father contacted me one evening and said he'd been thinking about everything that had happened, and he agreed with Karen that I'd been insensitive to Jenna's position and that some time away would be beneficial to everyone. He added that, until I was ready to be more aware of Jenna's feelings and more supportive of the family as a whole, I shouldn't attend family events since my attitude was causing friction and made things difficult for everyone else. I asked him if he was truly advising me not to attend family occasions because I was too happy in my relationship, and he replied that wasn't the point, but that my behavior had been selfish and unkind, and that actions had repercussions. I corrected myself. Fine, if that's how he felt about it, then I would respect his wishes and stay away from family events, but I thought he was making a huge mistake and prioritizing Jenna's inability to handle her own problems over his relationship with me. He said that if I was going to be stubborn and refuse to recognize how my actions were affecting others, perhaps some space might help me gain perspective on the matter. I replied that perhaps he was correct about the distance because I was weary of being made to feel guilty for having a healthy relationship when everyone else was so focused on enabling Jenna's dysfunction. After I hung up the phone, I sat in my car in the parking lot outside my office and cried for about 20 minutes because I couldn't believe that my own father was essentially expelling me from the family because I refused to pretend to be unhappy in order to make my half-sister feel better about her poor life choices. It felt like a surreal universe where being happy and stable was regarded as a character flaw, and producing perpetual drama was rewarded with attention and support. Della found me when I arrived home, took one look at my face, and drew me into an embrace without asking what was wrong. I recounted to him the entire discussion as he caressed my back and let me cry into his shirt. He said that my family was toxic, that I deserved better than to be treated as if my happiness was a burden or inconvenience to others, and that this forced separation from them might be a good thing, because it would give me some space to see how messed up the whole dynamic was. I thought he might be right, because the more I thought about it, the more I realized that my father and Karen had always treated Jenna as if she was fragile and required constant protection from reality, while expecting me to be self-sufficient and handle my own problems without any support or recognition. When I experienced relationship problems in the past, they'd listen politely for a few minutes before changing the subject or giving me general advice about how things would work out in the end. But with Jenna, they'd spend hours dissecting every aspect and devising complex strategies to make her feel better. Over the next several weeks, I found myself enjoying the break from family drama since I didn't have to worry about walking on eggshells around Jenna or monitoring my conduct to make sure I wasn't being too happy or successful in a way that would hurt her feelings. Ethan and I went to concerts, tried new restaurants, and went on weekend vacations without worrying about if any of it would make Jenna feel awful about her own life, and it felt liberating to simply exist without constantly second-guessing myself. My mother observed that I was more comfortable when we had lunch one Saturday, and when I told her about what had transpired on my father's side of the family, she was shocked. She said that forcing me to suppress my delight in order to protect someone else's feelings constituted emotional manipulation, and that healthy families celebrate one another's accomplishments, rather than considering them as threats to someone else's well-being. She also mentioned that Jenna was nearly 30 years old, and had been repeating the same patterns of relationship turmoil for over a decade, and that it might be time for her to take responsibility for her own decisions, rather than relying on others to manage her emotions for her. My mother said she'd been watching this dynamic play out for years, and was always concerned that my father and Karen were doing Jenna more harm than good by never allowing her to face the natural repercussions of her decisions. Meanwhile, Jenna kept texting me to complain about her new guy, who had shown to be just as problematic as the others, but in different ways. He was financially reckless and wanted her to pay for everything, and he had a fury that he vented on service personnel and those he deemed beneath him. He began to make comments about how she should dress and act that made her uncomfortable, but she didn't know how to respond. I was growing upset with these texts since it was so obvious that she was seeing another loser, but I knew if I brought it out, she'd become defensive and accuse me of being unsupportive, just like my father and Karen did. So I usually just responded with generic phrases like, "That sounds hard," and "You deserve better," which felt false but appeared to be what she was looking for. After about 6 weeks of this forced arrangement from my father's side of the family, Ethan and I were eating dinner at our favorite restaurant when he suddenly got serious and said he needed to ask me something important. My pulse raced because I assumed he was ready to end our relationship, but instead he pulled out a ring box and asked if I wanted to spend the rest of our lives making each other happy. I shouted yes before he could finish the question, since being with Ethan had shown me what it was like to be truly seen, respected, and supported by another person, and I couldn't imagine wanting to build a life with anyone else. The ring was ideal, simple and lovely without being overly flashy, and when I put it on, it felt like it had always belonged on my finger. We spent the rest of dinner chatting about our future plans, such as the house we wanted to buy, the trips we wanted to take, and the type of life we wanted to live. Everything felt conceivable and exhilarating in ways I'd never experienced before. We agreed that we didn't want a long engagement since we were both ready to begin our married lives together, and that we'd rather have a modest, personal wedding with only the people who truly meant to us than a large, expensive production that would stress us out for months. When we went home that night, I began building a mental list of the individuals I wanted to call with the news, and I saw that my father and Karen were not on it. The prospect of telling them about the engagement filled me with dread rather than excitement, because I knew they'd find a way to make it about Jenna and how my happiness was insensitive to her struggles, or they'd use it as an opportunity to lecture me about how I needed to fix our relationship before moving on with my life. I decided to contact my mother first, and when I told her the news, she yelled with pleasure, began crying happy tears, and requested to view the ring via video chat. She said she knew Ethan was the one for me from the moment she met him, that she'd never seen me as happy and at ease with anybody as I was with him, and that she couldn't wait to officially welcome him into the family. Then I contacted my best friend, who had introduced me to Ethan in the first place, and she said she'd been waiting for this call for months since it was so evident that we were meant to be together. We talked for an hour on the phone about wedding plans, venues, and outfits, and she quickly offered to be my maid of honor, which made me weep because I was so thankful to have people in my life who were genuinely excited for my happiness. But when the time came to call my father, I kept putting it off because I didn't want to cope with his difficult reaction. I knew that announcing my engagement would turn into a discussion about how I was being disrespectful to Jenna, how I should have waited until she was in a better place in her own life, or how I was being selfish by going ahead with my plans when our family relationships were strained. Finally, Ethan asked why I appeared nervous about telling my father about the engagement, and I said that I was concerned about how he and Karen would respond after everything that had happened in the previous several months. Ethan stated that their view should not matter when it came to our desire to marry, and that if they were unable to be happy for us, it was their problem, not ours. He was correct, but it still hurt to know that my own father would most likely find a way to make my engagement about someone else's troubles, rather than simply being glad that his daughter had met someone who loved her. I realized I'd been thinking that the engagement would somehow heal our relationship, that such plainly happy news would snap him out of whatever bizarre mindset he'd been in, and remind him that he was meant to care about my happiness as well. But when I eventually summoned the nerve to call him a few days later, the conversation went precisely as terribly as I had anticipated. He congratulated me in a cold, unenthusiastic tone, then immediately began asking questions about the time frame, whether we were planning a large wedding, and how much it would cost. as if he was interviewing me for a job rather than celebrating with his daughter. When I told him we were planning a small ceremony in the fall with only close relatives and friends, he replied it sounded wonderful. But then he paused, saying he hoped I understood that the matter with our family was still unresolved, and that having everyone together for a wedding would be unpleasant because there were still hurt feelings and unresolved issues. I asked him what he meant, and he said that Karen was still upset about our last conversation, that Jenna was going through a particularly difficult time right now, again, because her most recent relationship had ended badly, and that we should consider waiting until things were more settled before planning a big family celebration. I couldn't believe he was recommending I postpone my wedding because Jenna had split up with another lousy guy. So I told Della that we weren't going to put our life on hold while we waited for Jenna to get her act together, and that if my father and Karen couldn't accept my engagement, maybe they shouldn't come to the wedding at all. He became defensive and stated that that was not what he was saying, but that timing was important and that it would be best for everyone if we could handle our family issues before adding additional stress to the situation. I said that the only family issue was that he and Karen had determined that my happiness posed a threat to Jenna's well-being, and that I would not apologize for having a healthy relationship or wanting to marry someone who treated me well. The debate devolved from there, with my father accusing me of being tough and uncompromising, and me pointing out that I was the only one who had been forced to compromise anything, whilst Jenna continued to receive unlimited support and accommodation for her stupid decisions. In conclusion, he suggested that if that's how I felt about it, maybe we should all take some time to cool off before continuing to discuss it. I hung up feeling like, wham, because I couldn't believe my own father was basically telling me that my engagement was inconvenient for him. Della found me crying in the kitchen and hugged me while I told him what had occurred. He stated that we were going to have the most beautiful wedding with the people who truly loved and supported us, and that anyone who couldn't enjoy our happiness didn't deserve to be there. Over the next few weeks, I began arranging the wedding with my mother, best friend, and a few other close friends, and it was astonishing how much easier everything felt without having to accommodate people who didn't want to be there in the first place. We located the ideal location at a tiny winery outside of town, and we planned an intimate and meaningful ceremony rather than having to handle a slew of problematic family relationships. I kept expecting that my father would call to apologize and want to be included in the wedding planning, but my phone remained silent, save for the occasional text from Jenna about whatever new catastrophe was brewing in her life. She had finally split up with her financially irresponsible boyfriend. But now she was obsessed with a guy from her gym who hardly noticed her existence. And she was confident that if she could just figure out how to approach him, he'd understand they were destined to be together. The entire situation was so predictable and frustrating that I ended up deleting her texts without responding because I was tired of being expected to provide emotional support for her self-created problems while receiving no support or recognition for the positive things in my own life. As the wedding date approached, I had to make the difficult decision to send invites to my father and Karen, since part of me hoped they'd come to their senses and want to be a part of this special day in my life. However, when I called to inform them of the offer, my father stated that he and Karen had discussed it, and that they did not believe it would be proper for them to attend, given the present status of our relationships. I asked him if he was seriously refusing to attend his own daughter's wedding because I would not agree to hide my happiness to make Jenna feel better, and he said it wasn't about that, but that there were still unresolved issues between us that needed to be addressed before we could move forward. I stated that the only issue was his refusal to treat me with the same respect and support as he did Jenna, and that if he was ready to miss my wedding over it, that told all I needed to know about his priorities. He claimed I was being dramatic and making things more complicated than they needed to be, and that if I was prepared to apologize for how I handled things and commit to being more supportive of Jenna in the future, we could work it out. I stated that I had nothing to apologize for, and that I would not beg him to care about my happiness when he had made it apparent that Jenna's sentiments were more important to him than his connection with me. He closed the talk by expressing that he hoped I'd reevaluate my attitude and that the door was always open if I wanted to make things right, but he couldn't support my choices because I was being so selfish and disrespectful to the rest of the family. I responded that we'd have to agree to differ about what family support looked like, and that I hoped he'd be satisfied with his decision when he explained why he wasn't at his daughter's wedding. When I informed Ethan about the talk, he claimed that my father was manipulative and emotionally abusive, and that I deserved so much better than to be treated as if my pleasure was dependent on making everyone else comfortable. He promised that our wedding would be beautiful because it would be filled with people who truly loved us and wanted us to be happy, and that we would begin our marriage surrounded by true support rather than destructive turmoil. He was definitely correct, since our wedding day was the most beautiful and happiest day of my life. My mother escorted me down the aisle because my father had chosen not to attend, and she looked so pleased and happy that I nearly burst into tears before I ever reached Della. The ceremony was everything we hoped for, intimate and meaningful, surrounded by people who were really happy to celebrate our love. My mother gave an incredible speech at the reception about how she had watched me develop into a lady who deserved to be treasured and supported, and how pleased she was that Ethan had entered my life to love me the way I deserved to be loved. My best friend mentioned how evident it was that Ethan and I were meant to be together, and how she had never seen two people more perfectly suited to make each other happy. The entire day felt exactly as a wedding should. A celebration of love and commitment surrounded by people who only wanted to see us prosper and grow together. There was no drama, stress, or anyone dictating how we should feel or act. Only pure joy, love, and support from those who cared the most. However, the aftermath of the wedding revealed an entirely new level of familial dysfunction that I had not anticipated. A few days after we returned from our honeymoon, I began receiving angry texts from Karen about how hurt and betrayed she felt that we had gone ahead with the wedding without doing more to include them, and how she couldn't believe I was willing to destroy our family relationships over such a minor disagreement. She indicated that Jenna was upset to see the wedding images on social media, that it was cruel of me to display my happiness while she was going through a tough time, and that I should have been more sensitive to how my actions could affect others. I was astounded that, despite missing my wedding totally, she was still attempting to make it about Jenna's feelings, rather than admitting that perhaps they had made a mistake by not attending. I responded that I had not harmed any family relationships, but that I had simply stopped allowing my happiness to be held hostage by someone else's inability to deal with their own problems, and that if they were devastated about missing my wedding, they should have made different priorities. I said that I had invited them to be a part of the most significant day of my life, but they had declined since supporting me would have required them to accept that their treatment of me was incorrect. Karen responded with a message about how I had changed and become selfish and cold, how the person I used to be would never have prioritized my personal demands over my family's needs, and how disappointed she was in the woman I had become. She explained that Jenna had always looked up to me and appreciated my strength, but that now she felt rejected and abandoned by her own sister, and that I needed to accept responsibility for the anguish I had caused. As I read that message, I understood Karen was living in a parallel reality in which I was meant to be happy for being treated as a second-class family member, and where setting boundaries and asking basic respect was somehow selfish and cruel. She honestly appeared to believe that I should have been honored to give up my own happiness and wedding day to accommodate Jenna's emotional concerns, and that my refusal to do so made me a terrible person. I chose not to respond to her message because there was no use in attempting to reason with someone who was so concerned in preserving this bizarre relationship in which Jenna's troubles were everyone else's burden. Instead, I disabled her phone number and focused on enjoying my new marriage and the life Della and I were creating together. My father contacted me a few weeks later, and I assumed he was going to apologize and try to rebuild our relationship. Instead, he launched into a lecture about how my behavior since the wedding had been wrong and hurtful, and how I needed to contact Karen and Jenna to apologize for the anguish I had caused them. He claimed that family was supposed to be more important than everything else, and that my decision to cut them off over this argument demonstrated that I had lost sight of what truly mattered in life. I questioned him if he truly believed that family was the most important thing, and if so, why he was ready to miss his own daughter's wedding rather than accept that he had treated me unfairly. I explained that I had always prioritized family, but that I had finally recognized that the relationship had to be reciprocal, and that I was not going to continue sacrificing my well-being to preserve connections with individuals who did not value or respect me. He claimed I was overreacting, that no one had asked me to sacrifice my well-being, but that having a family sometimes required putting other people's needs ahead of your own, and that my failure to do so when Jenna needed help showed that I was selfish and immature. I explained that I had been putting other people's needs ahead of my own for years, and that when I asked for basic attention and respect in return, I was told I was unreasonable and demanding. For the next 20 minutes, the talk went in circles, with him maintaining that I was wrong and needed to rectify things, and me pointing out that I wasn't the one who caused the scenario in the first place. Finally, I told him that I loved him, but that I wasn't going to keep having the same debate, and that if he wanted to be in a relationship with me, he needed to realize that I was an adult who deserved to be treated with the same care and attention that he did Jenna. He stated that he hoped I'd finally come to my senses and see what I was throwing away, and that he'd be waiting for me to apologize and put things right when I was ready to be rational. I said that I wasn't throwing anything away, but that I was tired of receiving crumbs when I deserved a place at the table, and that if he was waiting for me to apologize for wanting to be happy, He would be waiting a long time. Della told me that he was proud of me for standing up for myself and for us, and that he had watched me struggle with this poisonous dynamic for months without knowing how to help me realize that I deserved better. He added that individuals who truly loved me would never ask me to shrink or hide my happiness to make them feel better, and that anyone who couldn't appreciate my accomplishments wasn't really my family in any meaningful way. Over the next 6 months I received frequent updates on Jenna's life via relatives and social media, and the pattern remained consistent. She'd gotten engaged with the gym guy, who turned out to be married, and when that predictably imploded, she'd gone on to this older divorced guy she met at a coffee shop, who had 3 kids, 2 ex-wives, and a mountain of baggage that should have been obvious from space. Each new calamity followed the same pattern, with Jenna crying to my father and Karen about how she couldn't understand why these things kept happening to her, and then stopping everything to run over and console her and figure out what was wrong. According to my cousin, who still spoke with everyone, my father had been paying Jenna's rent for the past 3 months since she had become so emotionally overwhelmed by her most recent breakup that she was unable to focus at work and had been written up numerous times for poor performance. Meanwhile, Ethan and I were settling into married life in the best way possible, and each day I felt more happy that I'd chosen to prioritize my own pleasure over continuing to facilitate my family's dysfunction. We purchased a little house with a garden so Ethan could grow tomatoes and herbs, and we got a rescue dog named Benny, who made us laugh every day with his crazy nature and boundless energy. But around 8 months after the wedding, the relative tranquility was broken when my father contacted me at work one day, and I could tell by his tone that something was really wrong. He explained that Jenna had been hospitalized following what appeared to be a suicide attempt, and that she had left a note stating that she couldn't stand feeling like such a failure in comparison to everyone else, and that she was weary of being the family disappointment while I had the perfect life. I felt like I'd been hit by a truck because, even though Jenna and I had our disagreements, I'd never wanted anything bad to happen to her, and the thought that she might have killed herself because of something related to me was upsetting. I asked my father whether she was okay and which hospital she was in, and he replied she was stable, but the doctors wanted to keep her for observation for a few days to ensure her safety. Then he explained that he was calling because Jenna had specifically requested me, that she wanted to talk to me about everything that had happened between our families, and that perhaps this crisis could be an opportunity for all of us to come together and heal the schism that had been separating us. I responded, of course I would come to the hospital if Jenna wanted to see me, because regardless of our disagreements, she was still my half-sister and I cared about her well-being. But as I drove to the hospital, I developed a creeping sense of dread about the entire situation, because something about my father's tone felt deceptive in a manner that I couldn't quite explain. When I arrived at the hospital, I found my father and Karen in the waiting room, looking worn and exhausted. Karen burst into tears when she saw me and said she was so delighted I'd come because Jenna desperately wanted to see me. My father hugged me and suggested that perhaps this dreadful event could help us rediscover what was truly important and bring our family back together. I asked to see Jenna, and a nurse led me to a room where she lay in bed, pale and fatigued. When she spotted me, she burst into tears and apologized for everything that had happened, saying she'd been so jealous of my happiness that she'd made herself sick trying to compete with something she couldn't have. She said that seeing me get married and begin this beautiful life with Ethan made her realize how empty and pathetic her own life was, and that she'd been spiraling for months trying to find someone who would love her the way Ethan loved me, but that every relationship only made her feel worse about herself. She stated that the night she took the pills, she had been looking at our wedding images online, and felt as if she would never be good enough to deserve such happiness. I felt bad listening to her talk like this since I'd never want my happiness to bring anyone misery, and I told her that her worth as a person had nothing to do with her relationship status, and that she deserved love and happiness just as much as everyone else. I expressed my regret that she had been struggling so much, and that I hoped she had felt comfortable talking to me about what she was going through, rather than allowing it to escalate. But then she said something that made my blood run cold. My father and Karen had told her that I had said I thought she was pathetic and would never find anyone because she was too needy and desperate, and that I had been laughing about her relationship problems with Ethan, and making fun of her behind her back. I was astonished because I had never spoken anything like that about Jenna to anybody, and the idea that my father and Karen would lie to her about something so heinous was almost inconceivable. I assured Jenna that I had never said those things about her, and that whoever told her otherwise was lying. I also asked her where she obtained that information. She looked perplexed and explained that Karen had informed her about a conversation she had overheard between me and Ethan, in which we were allegedly making jokes about Jenna's dating disasters and discussing how uncomfortable it was to be connected to someone so needy for male attention. I was enraged because I realized Karen had completely made up this narrative to make Jenna feel even worse about herself, and to portray me as some kind of villain who was mocking her agony. I informed Jenna that the conversation she described had never occurred, that I would never say such things about her or anyone else, and that Karen had lied to her for reasons I didn't understand. Jenna looked perplexed and explained that Karen seemed so convinced about what she'd heard, and that it felt accurate because of how accomplished and happy I appeared in comparison to how miserable she was. I explained that my happiness had nothing to do with her troubles, and that comparing our lives was unfair to both of us, because we were separate individuals with different situations and choices. I spent about an hour with Jenna, going through some of her emotions and attempting to help her understand that her worth was not dictated by her relationship status, and that she has many positive characteristics and talents that had nothing to do with whether she was dating someone. By the time I left, she appeared a little more stable, saying she was glad I had gone to see her and that we could work on mending our connection after she was out of the hospital. But when I returned to the waiting area, I was furious at what Karen had done, and I confronted her about the lies she'd told Jenna about me allegedly ridiculing her. Karen became defensive, claiming that she had never told Jenna anything like that, and that Jenna may have misunderstood something or become confused due to her emotional state. I stated that Jenna had been extremely explicit about what Karen had allegedly overheard, and that it was clear that someone had purposefully supplied her false information to make her feel bad about herself and turn her against me. Karen told me that I was being paranoid, that no one was trying to turn anyone against me, and that I should focus on supporting Jenna rather than causing extra drama during a family crisis. My father jumped in and said that this was not the time or place for accusations and arguments, and that we all needed to band together to support Jenna rather than fight each other. I stated that while I wanted to support Jenna, I was not going to stand by while someone lied about me to manipulate her emotions, and that whoever told her those things about me owed her an apology and an explanation. The entire situation escalated into a massive argument right there in the hospital waiting room, with Karen accusing me of being selfish and making Jenna's crisis about myself, and me pointing out that someone in this family had a history of lying and manipulating situations to create drama, and that Jenna's emotional state was being used as a weapon against me, just as it had always been. Finally, my father suggested that if I couldn't be supportive during this tough time, I should leave, because Jenna didn't need the stress of family disagreement while she was recovering. I stated that I had been nothing but supportive of Jenna, but that I would not allow anyone to use her weakness as a reason to lie about me or manipulate the situation for their own benefit. I left the hospital feeling as if I'd been thrown through a meat grinder, because everything seemed to be set up to make me look like the bad guy and force me back into the dysfunctional family dynamic from which I'd worked so hard to break free. They seemed to have used Jenna's true emotional distress to suck me back into their web of deceit and guilt, and I felt awful about it all. When I came home and informed Ethan what had happened, he was enraged by the falsehoods Karen had told Jenna about me, and he described using someone's suicide attempt to manipulate family connections as one of the most vile things he'd ever heard of. He stated that, even if Jenna's crisis was genuine, the way my father and Karen handled it was abusive and inappropriate, and that I should not feel bad about refusing to join in their poisonous games. Over the next few days, my father called me several times, requesting me to return to the hospital and spend more time with Jenna, saying she had asked for me and that my presence seemed to make her feel better. But every time I visited, Karen would be there too, making these passive-aggressive remarks. After about a week of this, I told my father that I would continue to support Jenna as much as I could, but that I was not going to pretend that the problems in our family relationships were my fault, and that using Jenna's crisis to manipulate me into accepting blame for things I did not do was exacerbating the situation for everyone. He said that no one was attempting to manipulate anyone, and that if I truly cared about Jenna, I would be willing to accept responsibility for my role in her mental collapse. I stated that I loved Jenna deeply for Jenna, but that I was not responsible for her mental health or relationship issues, and that claiming differently was unjust to both of us. Jenna was released from the hospital a few days later, with a plan for outpatient treatment and medication management, and I made it a point to check in with her on a regular basis to see how she was doing and offer whatever assistance I could. But I also kept my distance from my father and Karen, because I could tell they were still attempting to use the incident to guilt me into believing their version of events and apologizing for things I had not done. I'd finally had enough. I told him that despite how they treated me, I had attempted for months to keep a relationship with them, and that I had continued to assist Jenna even after they used her crises to manipulate me. But I'd had enough of being the family's scapegoat while they framed themselves as the victims of my perceived selfishness. He told me that I was being dramatic, that family was more important than pride, and that if I left them over this, I would regret it for the rest of my life. I stated that the only regret I had was investing so much time and energy attempting to preserve connections with individuals who were determined to see me as the villain no matter what I did, and that I was finally ready to accept that some people would never change. That was my final conversation with my father, and it has been more than a year since then. Jenna and I text occasionally, and she's doing much better in therapy. She's also started setting some boundaries with our father and Karen, which is helping her develop more independence and self-awareness. My parents chose my sister's healing retreat over my valedictorian speech, so I exposed our family's secrets in my graduation speech. Have you ever met someone who could fill a room simply by opening their mouth, even if they weren't saying anything meaningful? That's Harper, my sister. She was the star of our family's never-ending show from the time she was born, loud, red-faced, wailing as if the world owed her something. And me? I was the understudy who never made it on stage. Not because I wasn't talented enough. Hell, I was better. But I didn't break anything. I did not cry at dinner. I didn't require assistance with every small thing. I just handled it. I finished my assignments, cleaned my own cuts, suppressed my tears, and smiled for photos, even though I was invisible in them. I used to think that if I worked hard enough and did everything correctly, someone would notice. They'd remark, "Hey Riley, thank you. You held this whole damn family together while we were busy chasing Harper around the country, fixing whatever mess she got herself into this time." That day never arrived. Instead, I received a pat on the head and a, "We're so proud of you, Em. You're just so easy." As if that was a compliment. Like being low maintenance meant I didn't require affection. Graduation was supposed to be the one time I got to shine. I worked for it, I deserved it. I remained up beyond 2 a.m., practically every night my senior year, pounding out calculus problems as Harper FaceTimed Mom from Bali to tell her how she was finally finding her center. I gave up parties, sports, and even sleep only to walk across the stage as valedictorian and hear my name announced over the loudspeaker, Riley Claire Watson. Number 1. Full scholarship, Ivy League bound. And maybe, just maybe, my parents would react the same way Harper does when she mentions starting a podcast. The call arrived 2 days before graduation. I was still in my gown when my phone rang and the word "Mom" flashed across the screen. I responded, expecting a pep talk. "It may be. We're so proud of you, honey." What I heard was her voice, airy and fluttery, as if she had just finished a glass of wine on the porch. "Hey sweetie," she said. "Listen, I wanted to talk to you about Saturday." I already knew, perhaps not in those exact words, but I felt it in my bones. The interval before disappointment. That brief moment before someone says something that will stay with you for years. "We won't be able to make it," she said, as if she were discussing a missed dentist visit. "Sam booked this yoga retreat in Sedona, and she really needs us right now. She's going through a lot." I did not say anything for a second. I just listened to the sound of her wind chimes from the other end. It felt like the cosmos was mocking me. "She needs you?" I asked, my voice as flat as a dry cracker. "She's processing some stuff. Her last retreat was canceled, and this one has this shaman she really connects with. We already paid for it, and you know how sensitive she gets when things don't go as planned." I wanted to shout. I wanted to tell her I didn't care about some barefoot man wearing a crystal necklace whispering affirmations into my sister's ears. I wanted to know if she had ever canceled anything for me. But I did not. Because that was not how it operated. Harper responded to the emergency. I was the backup generator. So I said, "Okay, cool." She paused. "Are you sure? You don't sound mad." "I'm not mad." Another falsehood. "So, what was the point?" She closed the call with a cherry. "We will FaceTime you, okay? We really love you. You are great, Em." I remained motionless for a minute after the screen went dark. I did not cry. I did not punch anything. I just sat there, holding my phone as if it were a dead fish. Then I stood up, approached my desk, and opened my laptop. I destroyed the draft speech I had written a week ago. The one with the thank yous and the "it takes a village" statements. The one in which I gave them credit. I began typing a new one. This time, the pace is slower. Sharper. With each keystroke, something inside me hardened. Not bitter, but crystal clear. They were not arriving. They went with Harper again. And I was not going to scream about it. I was determined to make sure everyone heard me regardless. Even them, especially them. The thing about growing up with a sister like Harper is that your existence gradually becomes the silent gap between her dramatic chapters, as if you were nothing more than a commercial break during her primetime crises. You learn to live on the outskirts, just far enough to avoid casting a shadow on her limelight. I used to think it was normal. After all, every family has a golden child, correct? However, it took me years to realize that being the easy one was not a blessing. The eraser was slow. One missed birthday party, one, "we'll make it up to you," at a time. My earliest memory of being replaced was not particularly tragic. Today was my 6th birthday. I had planned a little backyard celebration for a dozen students and a homemade cake that Mom promised we'd bake together. But when Harper awoke that morning with a sore throat, the entire situation changed. Mom glanced at me, her eyes filled with concern for Harper's well-being rather than mine. "We might need to cancel, sweetie," she whispered, pouring Harper ginger tea as if she were ill. We did not cancel, but she insisted that I cut the celebration short because Sam needs to rest. And I recall seeing my pals leave early with party favors that I didn't even get to dish out. It worsened as we grew older. Harper have a talent for disruption. During my junior year, I underwent minor surgery. Nothing major, just tonsillitis, outpatient. Dad said he'd take off work. Mom promised she would be there. But the night before, Harper was dumped by a guy named Austin. Or Aiden. I can't remember. And she had a complete emotional meltdown. I awoke from anesthesia to a nurse offering me juice alone. No parents. We just texted, "We'll swing by after we check on Sam." It's almost amazing how she managed to hijack events that had nothing to do with her. When I gave Kolaya my admission letter, which I had worked so hard for, she burst into tears at dinner because it reminded her that she had never been accepted to NYU and had always felt like the foolish one. She spoke it through tears, with her head bowed, like a humble martyr. The room moved to comfort her. My father actually remarked, "Let's not rub it in, Em." That moment stayed with me like a thorn I couldn't get out. You could think I disliked her, but I didn't. I pity her. I felt sorry for her because she really needed to be needed. How empty she must have felt if my joy resembled her failure. But pity has an expiration date. And mine hit the wall the moment my mother called about the yoga retreat. Something in me suddenly snapped. Not too loud. Not violent. Quiet. Cold. Focused. I didn't answer with wrath since I knew it would simply add to the story. Riley is being difficult. Riley is making it about her. Number I would give them nothing they could use to recast this as another Harper-centered epic. Instead, I maintained silence. Not the passive sort, but the weaponized one. The kind that does not beg, explain, or attempt to win. I channeled all of my rage into the one thing I could control. My words. I spent hours drafting, rewriting, deleting, and rewriting. The words had to be cutting enough to cut yet not overtly offensive. I didn't seek vengeance. I wanted the kind who grinned. The type that made you question if you were the one who misinterpreted something, even as you bled from it. By the way, graduating at the top of my class, number 13 out of everyone, did not feel as I expected. You might think you're invincible. But truthfully, it was just silent. Like the time before a storm, when everything seems too quiet. I no longer cared about the number, the medals, or even the acclaim. I just wanted one person in the audience to look up and see me. But they wouldn't be present. They'd be somewhere in the desert, breathing through their nostrils as some guy with a man bun instructed them to align their chakras. And honestly, it was fine. Because I now had no one to protect. I printed the final version of my speech late that night. It was after midnight, and the printer buzzed in the darkness, like a secret being born. I stared at the pages for a long time, reading the last paragraph repeatedly. Then I dropped the USB with the backup copy into a glass of water. What about the cloud file? Deleted. No copies. No redos. It was going to be live. Raw. Unrehearsed. I spoke it out loud. Not because anyone was listening, but because I wanted the words to exist in the air before they appeared in the room. Let's see if they finally hear me now. Graduation morning brought the kind of weather that makes you believe the cosmos is rooting for you. Clear sky, a pleasant breeze. No evidence of the chaos brewing behind the scenes of my lovely little cap and gown moment. A day when everything appears to be in order. I stood in front of the mirror, putting my honor cords over the stiff navy robe, trying to ignore the hollow ache in my stomach caused by who wouldn't be sitting in the audience. It was no longer a question. I hadn't gotten a text or a voicemail, Not even a last-minute apology laden with guilt and just enough spin to make it appear as if I was the one overreacting. Instead, when I opened my phone to check the time, I noticed Harper's most recent Instagram post, which featured her legs crossed on a bright orange mat with a newborn goat resting on her lap. They were both bathed in desert sunlight as a smiling stranger took a shot that looked like it belonged on the cover of a wellness magazine. She had tagged the location as Sedona. The caption reads, "Feeling realigned. So proud of how far I've come." I did not even roll my eyes. I simply turned off the phone, placed it in my backpack and let the silence settle in. My parents were not coming. That wasn't a surprise. What surprised me was how numb I felt about it. There were no tears or fury, only a focused, acute emptiness, similar to the steady breath before a final shot. I had my speech in my folder, freshly printed, with no digital backups or second revisions. It was not a eulogy. But it could as well have been. The auditorium was full, buzzing and hectic in that joyous, end-of-an-era way that only happens when hundreds of students and their families come together to celebrate the conclusion of a shared chapter. Balloons bounced against the ceiling. Phones were lifted in all directions. Laughter resonated above the quiet hum of the school band warming up. I smiled at the few professors who waved as we lined up backstage. But my gut remained hollow. Every other graduate had someone prepared to yell their name, cry in the crowd and exclaim, "We're so proud of you, baby." I had an empty row, or two, and a goat practicing yoga 3 states away. When they finally said my name, Riley Claire Watson, valedictorian, there was a roar of clapping, polite yet strong, echoing against the gymnasium walls. I stepped onto the stage, my speech in one hand and a microphone in the other, my heels clicking slowly. I peered out over the sea of faces. Parents hold tissues. The grandparents clapped for too long. A younger sibling yawned on the first row. Every face was beaming with pride, love, hope. Except for the two I had spent 18 years attempting to impress. They were not in those chairs. They were synchronizing chakras in the desert. "Good afternoon," I said, speaking clearly but not loudly. "I know I'm supposed to stand up here and thank everyone who helped me get to this moment, and I will. But first, I want to talk about something nobody ever puts on the graduation checklist: loneliness." You could feel the ripple spread throughout the audience. A subtle shift occurred, as folks realized this wasn't going to be the standard cookie-cutter speech with Dr. Seuss references and promises to keep in touch indefinitely. I want to talk about what it means to do everything right every test, every assignment, every quiet decision, and still feel like you're clapping for yourself because no one else showed up. Several heads inclined. A teacher's eyes expanded. Someone stopped the recording. There are people who think being strong means being silent. That being dependable means you don't need help. That being the easy one means you'll never break. My voice did not shake. My hands didn't either. I'd like to thank everyone who taught me how to stand alone, especially those who were never there to hold me when I fell. You could have heard a pin drop. Some students applauded. A few hooted, half in disbelief, half in admiration. Mrs. is a single teacher. Henson, who had usually discreetly sneaked me sweets before tests, wiped her eye with a tissue she feigned not to have. I grinned then. Not a big phony smile, but just enough to convey, that was real. And then I strode off the platform as if I had somewhere better to be, heels resounding down the steps, the folder tucked under my arm like a sheathed weapon after battle. Backstage, nobody said much. Several pats on the back. One guy commented, "Damn, that was badass." I just nodded as if it was nothing. I sat down, got out my phone, and saw what I had been looking for. Not congratulations, but the aftermath. 3 missed calls. 2 from my mother, and 1 from Harper. A voicemail message flashed red at the top of the screen. I pressed play. Her voice sounded tense, somewhat harsh, and on the verge of shattering. "Riley, what the hell? How could you do that to us? Everyone's calling us. Everyone heard what you said. That was cruel. I don't understand why you would humiliate your family like that." She didn't apologize. She didn't ask if I was all right. They consistently used the same line. How could I do this to them? I didn't respond. I just played the message again, this time a little softer, allowing her words to resonate in the void she had left behind. When I arrived home that night, I turned out all of the lights. I skipped the customary processes, such as the shower, tea, and decompression rituals, which generally helped me shake off the day's weight. There was nothing to decompress. It had already burnt out of me on there, beneath those brilliant lights, in front of people who had finally heard what I had spent my entire life whispering into holes. I removed the robe and cords and placed them neatly folded on my desk, a mute memorial to the version of myself who once believed that hard work would be enough to earn a seat at their table. The calls arrived in waves, predictably spaced, as if they were timing themselves for maximum guilt delivery. First Mom. Then Dad. Then Harper. Then it's over again. Nobody left voicemails this time, possibly because they knew I wouldn't listen. I did not. I just let the phone vibrate across my dresser and watched the screen light up with names I had long since stopped identifying with comfort. They didn't call because they were worried. They were calling because I had interrupted the storyline. And in our family, that was the cardinal sin. Telling the truth, unfiltered, in front of strangers. I figured that was it for the night. That I could sleep in the modest silence I'd created for myself. But around 10:30, there was a knock on the door. The kind that sounds like someone wants to be let in while also letting you know they're already upset. I opened it to see Harper standing there. Full mascara application, a flawless foundation. As if she had just returned from an audition for the role of concerned sister. Her eyes were red, but not from crying. Rather, she had rubbed them raw enough to make it appear like she had cried. "Seriously," she began, before I could say anything. "What the hell was that?" I didn't respond. I just stepped aside and let her in because I knew she didn't ask for permission. She came for her performance. She walked the living room, arms swinging in that dramatic way she liked to show people how overwhelmed she was. "You have embarrassed us. Do you have any idea how you sounded up there? People are sending me texts. Our elderly neighbor forwarded me a tape. Riley. Here's a clip." Nonetheless, I said nothing. Silence. I'd learnt that it rattles her more than yelling. She turned on me, her voice rising. "You made us look like monsters. We were simply trying to help. I needed the retreat. I've been coping with so much. And you made it all about yourself." That's when I laughed. Quiet. Not bitter. Just exhausted. The kind of laugh that lives in your throat when you realize the individual across from you is not just selfish, but also delusional. "You made my graduation about your goat yoga," I remarked, each word as deliberate and precise as a scalpel. "I gave one speech. One. And now suddenly, I'm the villain." Before she could react, the front door opened again, and there they were. Mom and Dad, as if she had summoned them via text. "Sweetheart," Mom murmured, already approaching me with her hands raised, like if she were entering a hostage negotiation. "We didn't want it to be like this. We just thought supporting Sam's healing." "Stop," I shouted, raising a hand. "Don't say healing journey one more time unless you want to hear what I really think about your guru-fueled parenting." Dad appeared to want to speak, but Mom jumped in again. As usual. "You don't understand what she's been through." "No," I replied, looking towards Harper. "I understand perfectly. You've all made sure of that. Every missed game, every ignored honor, every time I needed you and you were too busy picking up her pieces. I understand exactly who matters." "You're being unfair," Dad finally said. "We tried to be there for both of you." "No," I said, my voice harsher. "You tried to make me your emotional insurance policy while you spent 20 years funding her identity crisis." Harper's mouth dropped open, but nothing came out. For once. "Your healing journey is built on my silence," I remarked, locking gazes with her. "And I'm done sponsoring it." The room went silent. Not the stillness of folks who have recently learnt something new. The silence of those who recognized they couldn't make this moment into anything other than what it was. I grabbed the remote and switched off the lamp next the couch, leaving the room in comfortable darkness. They all stood there awkwardly, still waiting for the version of me they knew. The one who would give in, smooth things over and apologize for telling too much truth. "I'm cutting contact," I responded simply. "Not forever. Just until you learn how to treat me like a daughter and not a background character in Sam's reality show." My mother was stunned, not by remorse or humiliation, but by the difficulty of being told no for the first time by a child who had never asked for anything. Dad gazed at her, then at me, and back again, as if he were waiting for a script. I grabbed my keys and approached the door. "You're leaving?" Harper questioned, her voice breaking. I paused in mid-step, turned just enough to catch their gaze, and said the one thing I knew would haunt them for longer than any speech or voicemail could. "If you ever wonder why I didn't invite you to my wedding, you can play this moment back." The next morning dawned with an unearned silence, as if the universe had gone still, not out of peace, but because it was waiting for someone to decide what would happen next. I had not slept well. Not out of guilt. I was at peace with what I said, but because silence has a way of reverberating after years of swallowing everything you wanted to scream. I awoke without the need to scroll through the aftermath. There was no interest about who texted what or which distant family member called my name bold, selfish, or both. I threw on a hoodie, put on my shoes, and headed out for coffee, not out of habit, but out of necessity. Some days, all you need is the smell of something scorched and bitter in your palms to remember you're still alive. The air was cool, but not freezing, with that early morning calm that makes even the city appear too drowsy to be rude. I rounded the corner of my apartment building with keys still dangling in one hand. And there she was, sitting on the curb like a discarded marionette. At first I didn't recognize her. There's no yoga gear. There are no beautifully ripped sweatshirts or crystal necklaces. She wore no flowy pants or groomed hair, and her easy wave came organically every morning, she stated. She was dressed in simple jeans and a stretched-out college t-shirt that she had not earned. Her feet were bare against the concrete, and if she had bothered to put on makeup, it was gone. Harper appeared to have paused. Her life in the middle of a performance, and the mask had no time to catch up. She did not notice me right away. She was stooped over, arms wrapped about her knees, and her head sunk so low that it appeared she may collapse into herself and vanish completely. Then I heard it. Not a whimper, not a sniffle, but genuine sobbing. The kind that does not include explanations or scripted apologies. The type that simply tear out of you when there is nothing left to hold them in. I froze. I don't know how long I remained there, undecided whether to go back inside or continue strolling past her as if we were strangers. Part of me wished to demand an explanation. Another segment I just wanted to watch. And some little sliver, the one who remembers braiding each other's hair before school when we were 10, told me to sit down. So, I did. I strolled to the curb, lowered myself next her, and didn't say anything. I didn't ask, "What's wrong?" or "Are you okay?" because I knew better. Some questions do not need to be asked, particularly between siblings reared in a family where silence was not a luxury, but a necessity for survival. We sat like that for what seemed like hours, yet it couldn't have been more than 10 minutes. Her crying did not slow, nor did it become louder. She was not attempting to perform sadness. She wasn't looking to gain anything from it. For once there was no one to impress. Only me, the sidewalk, and the weight of the years between us. I did not touch her. I did not console her. Not because I didn't care, but because for the first time, I no longer felt responsible for her emotions. I was not going to be the one to make things better. And I believe she recognized this at some level. That could be why she didn't attempt to explain. She did not offer excuses. She did not begin outlining all the reasons she believed she deserved grace. She just wailed, like if she'd ran out of distractions. We did not glance at each other. We didn't hug. We did not say the words that people think are important. Sorry. I love you. You were correct. None of this existed in the gap between us. What lived there was heavier, older, and quieter. We were not adversaries at that time. Not rivals. Only two women were reared under a roof where appreciation was limited and emotional presence depended on who shouted the loudest. Two ladies who had learnt that quiet could protect or destroy you, depending on who controlled it. And now that stillness sat between us like a living thing, neither cruel nor kind, but simply honest. I considered everything I could say. I considered assuring her I didn't regret the speech. I considered expressing that I was tired of being the good one, the sensible one, the one who always accommodated her disorder. I considered asking if she finally understood. But I said nothing. Because perhaps she did. Perhaps she didn't. Perhaps she cried because I finally said something. Perhaps she cried because I finally stopped. My parents mocked my gardening dream, seating me far at my brother's wedding, but now their restaurant thrives on my vision. I was always aware as a child that I was unique among my relatives. I am a 35-year-old woman who comes from a long family of prosperous upstate New York restaurateurs. My mother, 60, oversees all of the employees at our family's traditional Italian restaurant, which is governed with an iron hand by my father, 65. Next is my 38-year-old older brother Mike, who is the golden kid destined to take over the company. I've been employed with Liberty Mutual Insurance for 10 years, moving up the corporate ladder to become a senior claims adjuster. My name frequently appeared on quarterly performance awards, and my office on the 28th floor had a breathtaking view of Central Park. I had a six-figure salary, a cozy condo in Manhattan, and the pride of my parents, who never stopped boasting about their successful business daughter. On paper, I was living the American dream. However, I felt like I was slowly suffocating every morning as I looked at my computer screen while going over accident claims. My escape, my lunch breaks in the little rooftop garden I had designed on our office building, was the only thing that kept me going. I had persuaded management to allow me to renovate the abandoned area, paying for it out of pocket. Spending thousands on soil, planters, and seasonal flowers made my coworkers think I was insane, but those priceless moments spent among flowers and herbs were the only times I felt fully alive. I spent almost every weekend in Grandma Rose's garden, which was my genuine haven. The most exquisite garden I had ever seen encircled her Victorian home on the outskirts of town. Grandma Rose was teaching me the language of flowers, companion planting, and soil pH while my brother spent his weekends studying the restaurant industry. One day in particular, while I was assisting her with planting springtime tulip bulbs, stands out in my memory. The air was crisp with the aroma of falling leaves, and it was early October. My hands were in the dirt for longer than required, and Grandma saw it. She patted the ground with her aged hands and said, "You feel it too, don't you?" I nodded, unable to put into words how it felt to work with plants and how alive I felt in her garden. That connection to the earth. Not everyone has it, you know? It's a gift. She showed me her treasured collection of gardening diaries that day, which included decades worth of handwritten notes about every plant she had ever grown, complete with meticulous sketches and pressed flowers. "Someday," she continued, "these will be yours when you're ready to follow your true path." The pivotal moment occurred during Thanksgiving dinner the previous year. With the aroma of turkey and Dad's special gravy filling the air, it was the typical after-hours family get-together at the restaurant. Mike was showcasing the new wine cellar at the restaurant, his most recent endeavor that Dad had readily approved. As I sat there, fingering the admission letter from the New York Botanical Garden School of Professional Horticulture in my pocket, Mom was talking about plans to grow the catering business. I finally plucked up the confidence to eat the pumpkin pie and turkey. I said, my voice hardly steady, "I'm going back to school. I've enrolled in the Botanical Gardens landscape design program." The ensuing hush was deafening. Mom's fork clattered on her plate, and Dad's cheeks turned the color of the cranberry sauce. Mike snorted and almost choked on his booze. "What are you?" The wine glasses vibrated as Dad's voice boomed across the table. "You want to abandon your work to play with plants when you're not getting any younger?" Mom's palm gripped her chest violently as her eyes welled up with tears. "But you're a senior claims adjuster, honey. How many individuals would kill for your job, do you know? How is your 401k doing? Your health insurance?" Every time he saw me caring for Mom's houseplants, Mike, who had been referring to me as the gardener since we were young, couldn't help but laugh. "So you're going to start gardening like a pro now? Are you insane? Living in a treehouse is the next step." Even though my hands were trembling beneath the table, I made myself keep going. My letter of resignation has already been turned in. The 15th of December is my last day. January is when classes begin. The plates jumped when Dad slammed his hand down on the table. "You can't count on our assistance if you do this. We didn't send you to business school only to see you lose everything because of a midlife crisis." Grandma Rose was the only one who stayed composed, purposefully putting down her wineglass. With that quiet power that could still make my father feel like a little boy, she asked him, "Joe, when was the last time you were genuinely happy doing anything you didn't pick for yourself?" Feeling defeated, I drove to Grandma Rose's house the day after the Thanksgiving catastrophe. She was cutting her beloved roses in her garden when I discovered her. She was wearing her favorite faded blue gardening apron, the one with pockets filled with plant identifiers and trimming tools, even though it was cold in November. As I assisted her with the pruning, I remarked, "Grandma, they don't understand. They believe that I'm wasting my life. They might be correct. Maybe starting again at 35 is crazy of me." Putting down her shears, Grandma Rose gazed at me with those sage eyes that had witnessed so much. "Your parents don't see the world the way we do, but they just want what's best for you, sweetie. These plants and the earth itself are magical. It would be a sin to throw away your gift." She showed me her greenhouse and her most fragile plants. She showed me a tiny orchid that was having trouble blooming as the warm, humid air surrounded us. "Take a look at this one." I knew better, even though everyone insisted it couldn't be saved. The most exquisite things don't often show themselves right away. "Like you, sweetheart." I began taking seminars at the New York Botanical Garden that winter. Basic living expenses and 2 years of schooling would be covered by the money I saved from the insurance company. I gave up my view of Manhattan for a little balcony where I could try container gardening when I moved to a smaller apartment in the Bronx, nearer the school. The program proved to be more difficult than I had anticipated. Landscape design required intricate calculations, a thorough understanding of ecological and architectural principles. It wasn't just about making things seem nice. My dreams were filled with plant combinations and garden designs, and every night I would go to bed feeling both tired and content. Rachel, a 28-year-old classmate with bright red hair and contagious energy, became my best friend. One day, as we were working on our CAD projects, she said to me, "You should see your face when you're designing. You seem to be speaking your mother tongue at last." However, family get-togethers turned into an endurance test. Even though I shifted from the family table to the bar, I continued to go to the restaurant for Sunday dinners. Mike would joke that I hadn't mastered the art of properly pushing a lawnmower yet. While Mom would give me newspaper clippings about corporate employment openings, Dad would sourly discuss Mike's intentions to expand the restaurant. I entered a little landscape design competition 6 months into my education. It was merely a small-scale event organized by the city's gardening association. Making sustainable urban areas that could meet social and environmental objectives was the main goal of my design. I was shocked to take first place. Even a brief item about it appeared in the local paper. At our next Sunday supper, I eagerly broke the news in the hopes that it would finally alter their viewpoint. Rather, Dad hardly raised his head from his plate. "That's good, honey, but when will you start living your life seriously?" Mike added, grinning as always. "Hey, perhaps you could create a garden for the dumpster area at the restaurant. Make it appear really fancy." In an attempt to be helpful in her own way, my mother said, "You know, if you apologized, Liberty Mutual would definitely accept you back. Mrs. Henderson informed me that your post has not yet been filled." I contacted Grandma Rose that evening as I was driving home with tears clouding my vision. As I vented my frustrations to her, she listened to me calmly. She disclosed, "Your father was the same way when he started the restaurant. His father wished for him to pursue a career in law. Look at him now. He is so certain that his path is the only one. It's interesting how life comes full circle, my love." As the months went by, my abilities improved. Small commissions began coming in, initially from friends and then from their friends. One local lifestyle blog showcased my container garden designs. My family, however, was unimpressed. As Mike continued his increasingly venomous gardener jokes, Dad would shift the topic anytime my work came up. Afterwards, Grandma Rose received the devastating news that her cancer was aggressive. She disappeared in a matter of weeks. She was still trying to give me gardening advice while propped up in her hospital bed the last time I visited her. "The winter bulbs," she said in a feeble but determined tone, "remember to place them sufficiently deep. And never forget that you're doing precisely what you were supposed to do, my love." I had no idea at the time that the circumstances leading up to my brother's impending wedding would fundamentally alter the relationships of our family. However, that is a tale that is worthy of being told separately. First update. I wanted to explain what transpired at my brother's wedding and the fallout after my last post received so much attention. 3 weeks have passed since my previous post, and a lot has changed. First, Grandma Rose's will underwent an unexpected change. She bequeathed to me her entire home and yard, which is currently valued at well over $800,000. For years, Dad had had his eye on that property, intending to use it for more restaurant parking. Dad's face took on that recognizable purple hue when the attorney revealed her choice. "This is absurd," he blew up. Mike was even blunter. He scoffed and said, "Great, now she can really play gardener with her own little kingdom." Amanda, his 32-year-old fiancée, snickered next to him and was already treating me with the same disdain as my brother. The fascinating part, though, is that there was a condition attached to the property. Grandma's plan for the garden had to guide my development and upkeep. She had left behind thorough plans and notebooks that included ideas for transforming a portion of the garden into a demonstration of environmentally friendly urban gardening. In order to save some of Grandma's rarest plants, I threw myself into remodeling the garden and collaborating with neighborhood conservation organizations. After word spread, I was contacted by a reputable gardening magazine about including the renovation in their Heritage Garden series. My brother's wedding followed. The large cream envelope containing the invitation was dripping with self-importance and gold foil. Given that Amanda's father owns half of the county's real estate, it was obviously intended to wow her affluent family. I made the decision to go, and I wore a basic yet stylish designer dress that I had purchased with some of the money I won from my competition. The ceremony was held at the most costly location in town, and Mike made sure everyone knew he had covered all of the costs personally, but I subsequently found out Dad had played a big role. The reception was where the real drama began. I was seated at table 23, which was adjacent to the kitchen doors and literally the farthest table from the main family table, even though we were immediate family. In fact, rather than my name, my place card said the gardener. Amanda went out of her way to introduce me to her acquaintances in the society. And this is Mike's sister, she continued, smiling patronizingly. The person who, what do you do again, exactly? Put some flowers in the ground or whatever. Behind their champagne glasses, her companions tittered. However, karma tends to balance things out. A famous event planner who knew me from the gardening magazine story had been engaged by the venue. Your sustainable garden designs are revolutionary, she said enthusiastically as she approached my table, expressing her honor at meeting me. I've been keeping along with your Instagram makeover project. The mayor, Amanda's uncle, took the microphone to deliver his address, and that was the real kicker. He complimented my creative designs and highlighted seeing my work on the city's new Sustainable Parks initiative. All of the society members who had been giggling suddenly turned to stare at me with renewed curiosity. As the mayor continued to compliment the family's gifted landscape architect, Dad and Mike sat there with their expressions frozen. Amanda was trying to control the situation by frantically whispering to her companions. Following the speech, a number of Amanda's family members approached me to discuss garden design. The head of the city's Parks and Recreation Department was one of them. For their next urban regeneration project, he said, they were searching for creative designers. Mom called the following day for the first time in months. She spoke hesitantly. I read the piece on Rose's garden in the magazine. The pictures, they're stunning. There, you've truly created something unique. Although Dad and Mike haven't mentioned anything yet, I've observed that the restaurant's About page now highlights their family's involvement with sustainable urban design. It's ironic that they still haven't offered me congratulations for any of my accomplishments. Next week, I have a meeting with the Parks Department to discuss the urban renewal project. Given that the proposed location is adjacent to my father's restaurant, it would be my largest commission to date. As Grandma Rose used to say, sometimes life has a way of coming full circle. Second update. I appreciate all of your encouraging remarks regarding my most recent update. 2 months have passed since the wedding, and things have changed in unexpected ways. The project for the Parks Department was larger than I had anticipated. They sought to turn an entire city block into a sustainable urban green space, complete with community gardens and an educational center, rather than merely designing a straightforward garden. The catch? The proposal would drastically cut down on parking spaces near nearby establishments, such as my father's restaurant. I noticed my father and Mike sitting in the back row, their faces darkening with every slide of my presentation as the first designs were given at the municipal council meeting. The parking lot they had been using informally for years would be removed as part of the project, and a community area and vertical garden would take its place. Mike got to his feet during the public comment session, his face flushed. Local businesses will be destroyed by this proposal. Has anyone thought about how it will affect the area's well-known eateries? He purposefully avoided eye contact with me. The mayor, Amanda's uncle, then raised his voice. In fact, research indicates that urban green spaces raise property values and foot traffic. There are designated restaurant zones with outdoor dining areas in your sister's design. If anything, this should help your business. Everyone in the room understood the irony. It was obvious that several of the council members were trying not to smile. This is where things become even more intriguing, though. Our family restaurant received an unexpected visit from a Michelin inspector last week. My father had been dreaming about this moment for decades. One little issue, though, was that their famous herb garden, which provided the fresh herbs for their well-known dishes, had suddenly begun to deteriorate. I was working on my project plans at Grandma's place when my mother called me in a panic. The plants are perishing. Tomorrow, the inspector will return for dinner. Your dad? He's not doing well with it. My father called an hour later. His normally authoritative voice seemed strained. We need your assistance. Oh, I spoke in a neutral tone. I didn't think gardening was a legitimate career. He paused for a long moment before asking, what is your consultation fee? He choked after I named a figure. $30,000 for consultation and emergency garden rehabilitation. That is robbery on the highway, he spluttered. In actuality, that is less than the going charge for managing horticulture emergencies. However, I'll offer you $25,000 as a family discount. They made the payment in a day. I identified the issue, poor soil pH and drainage problems, applied a fix, and preserved their priceless herbs. The inspector's inspection went well, and the local newspaper included an article about the restaurant's possibility for a Michelin star, emphasizing their creative herb garden created by a family member and famous landscape architect. My father was questioned by the reporter regarding the layout of the garden. When he had to admit my involvement, I saw him fight to suppress his pride. The finest aspect? I had nothing to do with the unsuccessful garden. All they had been doing was following an old gardening book's out-of-date maintenance instructions. They had almost lost their dream review because they had refused to seek advice from an expert, me especially. My father now has to grin and explain that his daughter, the landscape architect, created the restaurant's herb garden whenever someone remarks on it. Since then, the term gardener has not been used in a derogatory manner. The true fulfillment, however, came from an unexpected place. I was recruited to create Amanda's new showpiece garden by her mother, a legendary society queen. Her justification? The expression on Mike and Amanda's faces when they saw me at their house, talking plans with her mother over pricey tea in the conservatory, was priceless. Especially when Amanda's mother mentioned my fee, which was triple what I charged my father without any family discount. Well, darling, if you're good enough for the city's urban renewal project, you're good enough for us. My design studio will formally open next week. The prime location next to the restaurant where my father had been intending to expand was the ideal spot for me. Their herb garden, which I now take care of for a hefty monthly charge, is clearly visible from the wide windows. It's interesting how life works itself out. The irony would have pleased Grandma Rose. Third update. 3 months have passed since my last post, and I would like to offer the story's resolution. Your assistance has been amazing along our journey. The restaurant's adjacent urban renewal project began to attract national attention. The sustainable vertical gardens were featured in a number of major design magazines, and the project was nominated for an annual innovation award by a well-known environmental group. My father's restaurant received unexpected attention as a result of the exposure, but not in the way he had hoped. People started traveling especially to see that cutting-edge eatery with the magnificent herb garden created by the architect turned gardener. The family's skillful fusion of horticultural and culinary skills began to be noted by food experts. A documentary team from a well-known streaming service reached out to me last month about including the project in their Urban Change series. The gripping family story about how the restaurateur's daughter transformed urban gardening piqued their curiosity in particular. The producer wanted to shoot in the restaurant and my design studio. Given that local business associations were lauding the project's beneficial effects on the community, my father couldn't say no without coming across as petulant. A feature on the connection between culinary gardens was also desired by Food and Wine magazine. The producer questioned my father about his early resistance to my changing careers throughout the filming. His awkward wriggling as he attempted to explain himself was captured on camera. We only wanted what was best for her, that's all. I had an unexpected visitor at my studio the following day. My dad appeared older and more exposed than I had ever seen him before. He was holding his original recipe journal from when he initially opened the restaurant, a battered leather-bound book. Your grandmother was the only person who encouraged me to open the restaurant, he replied softly. My father wished for me to pursue a career in law. Cooking, he claimed, was beneath our family. He set the cookbook down on my desk. Didn't I become just like him? I'm trying to make my kids live the life I believe they ought to have. 80% of their vegetables and herbs now come from a rooftop garden project that started with the rehabilitation of their herb garden. There were months on the waiting list for tables with a garden view. The restaurant's Instagram following exploded with pictures of the vertical gardens, and food experts complimented the harmony between farm to table. At a recent business meeting, even Mike had to admit the difference. Indeed, they were now required to set up formal meetings with me. Gritting his teeth, he acknowledged that their earnings had gone up 40% since the garden makeover. After her mother hired me as the official landscape architect for their country club restoration, Amanda's attitude drastically changed. All of a sudden, she was telling everyone how she had always sensed that her sister-in-law's relationship with nature was unique. Last week, everything came together. The success of our urban revitalization initiative impressed the city's sustainability board, which suggested a significant extension. My father's restaurant was to be the focal point of a green corridor that would link a number of nearby businesses. The catch? The restaurant would have to create a display garden out of the remaining parking space. In addition to promising to highlight the restaurant in their tourism promotions, the city provided significant tax benefits. This time, instead of calling a meal where everyone chatted over me, my father arranged an emergency family meeting. I sat at the head of the table in the restaurant's private dining room for the first time. We need your help, he remarked in a meaningful voice. Not only as an advisor, as a collaborator. They made an unexpected suggestion. They intended to establish a joint venture that would incorporate the restaurant and my design studio into a horticulture and culinary experience center. In order to incorporate my professional name, My father even proposed changing it. The financial estimates were provided by Mike, who appeared to have bitten into a lemon. It was difficult to ignore the numbers. Even he had to acknowledge that my hobby of gardening had become a lucrative business venture. Mom produced a long-forgotten old picture of me at age 6, displaying my first tomato plant in Grandma Rose's garden with pride. "We ought to have witnessed it back then," she remarked quietly. "A corporate office was never the right place for you. The businesses are now integrating. An exquisite herb leaf design may be found in the restaurant's new logo. Each meal on the menu identifies the precise garden location of its ingredients, and the menu proudly states, 'From our garden to your table.'" Our project was featured in a national magazine's list of the top 10 innovative family businesses last week. When they especially commended the second-generation restaurateur family for embracing their daughter's goal to transform urban dining, the irony was not lost on anyone. It all began in Grandma Rose's garden, which is now a sustainable urban agriculture education center. We are collaborating with nearby schools to offer educational programs, and the waiting list for workshops is months long. The most unexpected thing? Before the restaurant opens, Dad now spends his mornings in the garden. He was wearing one of our branded garden aprons when I recently saw him diligently caring for the herbs. He appeared calmer than I had seen him in a long time. At family get-togethers, people used to make fun of me as the gardener. Do you recall that? "Welcome to the garden table, where the gardener's vision meets culinary excellence," the host now says to patrons. I was moved to tears by a letter I received yesterday. A high school student who had participated in one of our gardening classes sent it to us. She wrote about how she was motivated to defy her parents, who wanted her to pursue a career in medicine, after seeing my tale in the documentary. Her love was environmental science. A sketch of a garden idea she came up with was included in the letter. It looked a lot like my early sketches from Grandma Rose's journals. In an effort to start our first kid mentorship program, I've extended an invitation to her to work as an intern this summer. I've learned a lot about family legacies from this entire ordeal. It's not always necessary to follow the route your ancestors paved. Sometimes, honoring their heritage means broadening it to encompass new opportunities. My father constructed a restaurant that served delicious meals and united people. In order to nourish not just their bodies but also their souls. I added gardens that help children feel more connected to the earth. I want to express my gratitude to everyone on Reddit who helped me along the way. When my own family failed to recognize my value, your support kept me going. I want to express my gratitude to everyone who shared similar experiences of pursuing their aspirations in spite of family resistance. You made me understand I wasn't the only one. Stay on course if you're having similar difficulties. Occasionally, the same thing your family makes fun of turns out to be the secret to changing both your and their lives. My family didn't invite me to the reunion, so I showed up unannounced, shared my engagement news, and finally took a stand for myself. I am the youngest of 3 siblings and I am 28 years old. As a child, it was clear that I was the odd one out. There was always an obvious favorite, or favorites, I might say, among my parents. With their stable careers, large homes, ideal marriages, and those cute Christmas card families, my brother, 35M, and sister, 32F, were everything parents could boast about. My sister is a lawyer of some sort, and my brother works in finance. Both of them reside in lovely suburban communities with spouses who complement their professional backgrounds. Every family gathering is an opportunity for my parents to brag about their kids to friends and family. And then me. 2 years ago, I left my corporate position to launch a modest business of which I am really proud. I'm content with my life and earn enough money to live comfortably. Together, my 5-year boyfriend and I share a rental home. Even though we're not making a lot of money, we're doing okay. But my folks had a different perspective. Stable and traditional are terms they frequently use, and I suppose I don't suit that description. The subtle jabs about my hobby job, and remarks about how much better my life would be if I had persisted with a 9-to-5 have become unimportant to me. On the surface, we've always been courteous, but the tension has been for years. I didn't believe it was this horrible though. I came across my cousin's tale on Instagram a few weeks ago while perusing the platform. She appeared to be at a large family reunion. With all of the extended family gathered in one house, it was the type of gathering that my family often hosts a few times a year. There were my sister and brother, grinning with their partners. Except for me, my aunt, uncle and cousins were all tagged. I initially believed that I might have missed the group conversation. Perhaps the invitation got lost in all of my alerts. I sent my siblings an SMS. While my sister responds more slowly, she doesn't entirely ignore me, and my brother typically responds right away. Nothing happened for hours. I began to have the strange sensation in my chest that occurs when you know something is amiss but are reluctant to acknowledge it just yet. I called my mother the following day. I asked her how she was doing and if there had been a get-together, using a conversational tone. For far too long, the phone line went silent. She said, "Oh, the reunion? I didn't think you'd want to come. You're always so busy with your little business and everything." I took a moment to answer. I questioned her about why she thought I wouldn't want to attend. After all, my family is my family. She seemed to be trying to shrug the discussion aside as her voice became lighter. "We just didn't want to bother you, sweetheart. Besides, you've missed a few events before." Indeed, but primarily due to work, and not without informing them. As I persisted, it became increasingly evident that my absence was not an accident. They hadn't forgotten me. They had declined my invitation. Something about hearing it firsthand made my stomach plummet, and I'm not sure why. I hung up and sat there listening to the exchange again. I had previously experienced exclusion. Plans for many of the holidays seemed to center around my brothers' or sisters' families. I used to convince myself that it wasn't deliberate. Perhaps they didn't consider how I would fit into their plans because I didn't have children or a conventional lifestyle. I was unable to ignore it any longer, though, as I sat in my peaceful kitchen and watched my boyfriend work in the other room. This was intentional. My partner was incensed on my behalf when I told him. "You need to go anyway. They don't get to decide you don't belong there," he replied. He was correct. Why should I allow them to act as though I don't exist? I was tired of being treated like an afterthought by my family. Whether they liked it or not, I deserved to be a member of my family. The plan began to take shape at that point. I had been holding on to one card for weeks, and I hadn't played it yet. 2 weeks prior, my boyfriend and I had become engaged. I wanted to do it face to face with the people who should be concerned about my life, but we hadn't notified anyone. Now, though, I had my own motives. I would remind them of my presence if they were considering excluding me from my family. This time, they wouldn't ignore me. I made the decision to arrive without warning. I declined my boyfriend's, bless him, invitation to accompany me. I had to take care of this on my own. We devised a contingency plan, and he agreed to drive up and grab me if things didn't work out. If they didn't want me there, I would arrive and then depart, but not before telling them what I had to say. In order to make it appear as though I had always meant to attend, I prepared a large quantity of snacks to bring with me in the days before. For me, this wasn't about proving myself, even if my partner insisted that I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. I had to be there for myself. I had had enough of fading away because they didn't think I belonged. I promised myself that if I had to leave, I would go, smile, and share my news. Although I had no control on their feelings toward me, I did have influence over how I responded to it. I refused to let them treat me like an outsider for once. Additionally, I would at least have closure if things didn't work out. First update. It took slightly over 3 hours to go to my folks' house. The majority of time was spent on how to appear unimpressed, as if I had simply happened to stop by since, well, I was aware of the family reunion. It seemed a bit ironic given why I was there, but the box of handmade cookies on the passenger seat smelled sweet and soothing. After checking the place twice, my partner assured me that he would be prepared to come get me if I needed a way out. I promised to keep him informed. The house was filled with automobiles parked on the lawn and along the driveway when I eventually pulled there. I inhaled deeply, picked up the treat box, and made my way to the front door. From within came the sounds of music, laughter, and clinking dishes. I stepped through the slightly open door. The noise stopped as soon as I entered. I knew they had all seen me without having to glance up. I sensed dozens of eyes swinging toward me as conversations broke off in the middle of sentences. My mother recovered first. She hurried over, her voice too happy and high. "Oh, you succeeded? How unexpected?" She merely patted my arm and moved away without giving me an embrace. Her eyes did not meet the phony warmth in her voice. There was an uneasy shuffle of movement in the room. People resumed their talks, but things had changed. Before my brother vanished into the kitchen, I saw him and my sister looking at each other across the room. Standing with her husband, my sister gave me a quick look before launching back into a boisterous discussion with other aunts. Across the room, I saw my cousin, the same person whose Instagram tale had given me the hint. Despite her apparent astonishment at seeing me, she nodded and smiled slightly. On the dining table, I set my package of goodies next to a spread of what appeared to be catered cuisine. Nobody even looked at my belongings. It hurt when I heard an aunt whispering to someone by the hallway, "Did they not invite her on purpose?" While I was moving through the room, I slipped by them into the living room after pausing to check my phone. My cousin drew me aside a few minutes later. She lowered her voice and looked over her shoulder. They didn't think you'd come. Your parents, well, they didn't think you'd fit in here anymore. In spite of her apparent remorse, she said, fit in, as if I were a shattered puzzle piece in a family portrait. My dad was by the drink station when I left, but I can't recall what I muttered in response. I made the decision to give it a try. I questioned him why no one had told me about the reunion. As he filled the glass, he hardly raised his head to say, we thought you'd be happier doing your own thing. The words hung thick in the air, yet it wasn't unkind. Since it was clear that I would not receive answers, I didn't press him any further. I didn't feel like making small chat with relatives who were acting as though they didn't see me, and the box of cookies I had brought was still unopened on the table. But it wasn't all bad. A few of my younger cousins approached to greet me. I felt a little better when they inquired about my company and mentioned that they had seen some of my work online. Someone cared about my life, at least. Once more, there was a bustle of talk in the room, and I sat down close to the corner and browsed through my phone idly. I simply needed time to think on what to do next. I didn't want to cause a scene. My sister's voice broke through the commotion at that point. Her face was beaming with joy as she clapped her hands. The room fell silent as she said, everyone, I have some news to share. And everyone's eyes shifted to her as she revealed she was expecting her second child. Cheers broke out. As everyone applauded, a few uncles made a joke about placing wagers on whether it would be a girl or a boy. My mother appeared as though she could burst with joy. Nobody gave me a sidelong glance. As I stood there, I heard the laughter and congrats. I seemed to have vanished once more. As usual, the same motif. The fact that I was present was irrelevant. The fact that I had arrived even though I hadn't been invited didn't matter. They would always treat me like an outsider and glorify my siblings. Something broke inside of me. I'm not sure if it was my dad's departure, the rumors I had heard, or the fact that my cookies were still unopened. Perhaps it was everything. I took a glass off the drink table and gave it a loud fork clink. Heads turned to face me as the room gradually became quiet once more. After enjoying the attention, my sister became irritated. I choose to disregard it. Well, I continued steadily, I have something to say too, since we're sharing big news. Second update. As soon as I walked in, the place was silent once more. All eyes were on me, all conversations halted, and forks froze in mid-air. But compared to when my sister revealed her pregnancy, the attention wasn't as enthusiastic or welcoming. I felt as though I had disturbed a sacred item. Despite my racing heart, I stood up and held my hand firm. I just wanted to share some news of my own, I said. I raised my left hand to reveal the engagement ring, which sparkled in the light from the dining room. No one responded for a second when I said, I got engaged 2 weeks ago? The silence was then broken by a few dispersed claps. From the side of the room, my little cousins, God bless them, cheered me on. The rest of the room remained motionless, as though they were still processing it, but a courteous uncle gave a nod of assent. Before forcing a faint smile, the kind she typically saved for strangers, my mom's face fell. Why didn't you inform us earlier? Her voice sounded more like an accusation than one of enthusiasm or inquiry. Her gaze flicked to the ring and then returned to me. I didn't think twice. I said, loud enough for everyone to hear, I wasn't sure you'd care. I wasn't invited here, after all. I assumed you no longer wanted me to be involved in family matters. Discomfort spread throughout the room. Pretending to check their phones, people looked at each other or moved in their seats. After standing by the kitchen doorway, my brother moved forward and pushed off the frame. His voice was sharp, and his face was crimson. You are not the focus of this. You have to put yourself first at all times. There was a response to that. A few whispered to themselves, not now. Yet I could sense that everyone was observing. My brother's crossed arms and intense gaze made it difficult for me to speak. So I did. Really, I shot back, you all seem fine without me, but I don't remember getting an invitation to this little party. My engagement is as significant as the news of anybody else. The room became silent once more at that point. My sister refused to look at me since she was still blushing from her own news. My mother's courteous facade was beginning to crumble, and her face changed to one that was more recognizable. Annoyance. I saw her take a breath, likely to speak, but before she could, a voice broke the silence. One of my relatives remarked, she has every reason to be angry. Her arms were folded as she sat close to the couch's edge. What did you expect if you didn't invite her? That she would simply remain silent indefinitely? Some people turned to look at my cousin. From the dining table came another voice. Yes, it's not as though she's incorrect. I sensed a change for a split second. Although it wasn't much, it was sufficient. The fissures were visible. My mom shifted the topic, as she always does when she's cornered, likely understanding she was losing control of the situation. "Well, let's not forget how exciting it is that your sister is having another baby," she remarked, bringing a smile back to her voice. "The family is thrilled to hear that." There was a deflection, so clear. She was unable to give me this moment, not even for a brief moment. Immediately, the focus returned to my sister, who grinned broadly and thanked everyone once more for their congrats. My brother gave me a cocky grin like he was saying, "See? I was done." I took my phone out of my pocket and texted my lover, "Come get me," without uttering a word. I wasn't going to stay any longer than absolutely necessary. I picked up my handbag and made my way to the front entrance. Two of my younger relatives hurried after me, apologizing and inquiring as to where I was going. One of them hugged me and whispered, "You don't deserve this?" I returned the hug and assured her that I would be all right. It wasn't loud, but it was loud enough to hear my dad murmur, "Drama queen," from the side of the room as I was putting on my coat. I hesitated for a moment, but I didn't look back. Rather, I opened the door and went outdoors. The cool air cleared the heaviness in my chest and struck me like a jolt. One of my relatives came running out after me before I had gone halfway down the driveway. Her shoes crunched on the gravel as she jogged to catch up. "Hold on," she yelled. I paused and looked at her. She appeared embarrassed, almost as if she was at a loss for words. "I apologize," she blurted. "For everything." It was courageous. In there you defended yourself. That was not how you should have been treated. I swallowed the lump in my throat and nodded. I managed to say, "Thanks." Perhaps someone from inside asked what I was doing when her phone buzzed in her pocket. She rushed back toward the house after giving me one final pitying glance. After a few minutes, my boyfriend's vehicle arrived. I buckled my seatbelt, threw my purse on the seat and got in. I started crying as soon as I sensed the car moving. The tears flowed quickly and forcefully, like if I had been suppressing them for hours. My guy simply reached over and squeezed my hand without saying anything. As the trees beyond the window blurred by, I let it all out. The sobbing had subsided into soft sniffles by the time we drove onto the main road. Although I still felt raw and ashamed, there was also relief behind all of that. I hadn't just let it happen for the first time. I had raised my voice. Even if they didn't want to, I forced them to see me. Third update. At first, the only sound on the drive home was the hum of the road. As my fiancé drove, I gazed out the window, mentally reliving every moment of the recent reunion. I eventually opened up, discussing my brother's teasing, my dad's remark about my being a drama queen, my mother's disregard for me, and how my sister's pregnancy announcement had been the last straw. It all spilled out. With his palm resting on the gear shift, my fiancé listened and occasionally nodded. "You did the right thing," he added, looking over when I was done. "They have no right to declare you unimportant. We will proceed without requiring their consent." It was helpful to hear, yet I remained silent. My phone buzzed as we got close to home. I looked down. The cousin who had followed me out of the gathering had left me a message. "You were correct. For a long time, your parents have been discussing you behind your back." I straightened my posture. There was more to the message. "I apologize, but you must understand this. Your mother told everyone that your lack of a steady career makes you a disappointment. Additionally, she stated that your sister's announcement is far more significant than your engagement." It didn't seem fair to me. In an attempt to comprehend the words, I read them twice. I was still looking at the screen when I received a second message, this one containing screenshots. It came from a family catch-ups group chat, of which I had obviously been excluded. My mother's name was prominently displayed in one of the screenshots. I'm not sure why she would want to attend anyhow. She constantly makes things about herself and does her own thing. Giving up a real career to pretend to be a business owner? So self-centered. If nothing else, sister is leading a life of which we may be proud. My chest constricted. The subsequent screen grab was even worse. Since I didn't want her to show up and ruin the day with a dramatic story about her engagement, I honestly didn't notify her about the reunion. Who cares? She's not getting married first, after all. When the television came back to life, I sensed my fiancé looking at me. "What is it?" he inquired. "Proof," I muttered. I was still gazing at the screenshots when we arrived home. I entered my family group chat, which I had been kicked out of years ago and was only periodically added back in for important updates, and added myself back in. I wasn't sure if this was because I was angry, wounded, or incredulous. I sent the screenshots as soon as I noticed my name appeared in the chat. Just those receipts for everyone to see, nothing else. I typed, "Is this how you truly feel about me?" a few seconds later. I suppose I ought to have remained forgotten at that time. Setting my phone aside, I waited. It was not long before the responses began to pour in. First to enter, my brother said, "This was private. You're blowing things out of proportion and being dramatic as usual." My sister then asked, "What did you anticipate would happen if you shared this? For no apparent reason, you're making things worse. Give it up." Their texts appeared like fast fire as I watched them type one after the other. Before my mother's name was ultimately displayed, I gave them a minute to vent. Compared to the others, her message was longer. Those remarks were misconstrued. "I don't like you creating all this needless drama, and you're reading too much into things. You've been overly sensitive all along. Taken out of context?" I scribbled a response as I took up the phone once more. "I'm offended because this is not how any parent should discuss their child. This is your opinion of me, even though I wasn't invited to my own family's reunion?" My dad's name showed up in the chat for the first time, but he only typed a scene tag beneath my message instead of typing anything. I didn't stay to finish reading it. I threw my phone onto the couch and placed it on silent. Sitting beside me, my fiancé drew me in. However, my phone buzzed once again shortly after. One of my aunts sent me a private message saying, "I had no idea that any of this was going on. I sincerely apologize for the treatment you received. You're worthy of better." Another reply arrived a few minutes later, saying, "We're proud of you for standing up for yourself. Nobody should be able to convince you otherwise." Although it wasn't much, it gave me hope that I wasn't going insane. I wondered for a long time if I was exaggerating. As my mother used to say, I might have been overly sensitive. However, I now had evidence, and a few supporters, at the very least. My phone rang just as I was beginning to believe that the worst was past. The name of my sister appeared on the screen. I nearly didn't respond, but I did. She wasted no time at all. She remarked, "You're destroying the family dynamic. What prevented you from letting it go? Mom didn't want any conflict, therefore she didn't invite you. You have merely exacerbated the situation." I refrained from arguing. I didn't shout. "You don't let go of not being invited to your own family's reunion," I simply retorted. Then she hung up the phone. I decided I'd had enough that evening as I sat with my fiancé. I wasn't going to ask for their blessing all the time. A family who obviously didn't want me around was not someone I was going to pursue. I have to back down for my own mental health. The group chat was erased by me. My sister's number was blocked by me. And I allowed myself to give up for the first time in years. If love wasn't offered freely, I wouldn't beg for it. Update 4. My phone called out of the blue a week after the repercussions from the family group chat. I froze after taking a quick look at the screen. It was my father. For background, I didn't get many calls from my dad. Never. I was astonished to see his name appear because he mainly left family affairs to my mom. I considered leaving it on voicemail, but my curiosity won out. I took it up. He initially only made the customary awkward small talk. After a lengthy silence, he finally stated that he wanted to clarify the reunion. He spoke in a rigid, nearly practiced voice. He maintained it wasn't intended to harm me and referred to it as a miscommunication. I hadn't heard anything like an apology from him in a long time. I didn't give him a pass. I inquired as to why I hadn't been invited earlier. After struggling to find the right words, he finally said, "It wasn't intentional." I told him that didn't make sense since how can it be an accident to forget to invite your own child? I persisted, reminding him that my mother's own remarks in the group chat demonstrated differently, but he didn't respond. A second too long, the silence lingered, and then he broke. Quietly, he acknowledged. "She believed it would be better that way. Your mother did not wish for any conflict." That's when I heard it. My mother's voice, followed by a slight background rustle. She must have been using the speakerphone to listen in because she abruptly interrupted the conversation. She answered abruptly, "I'm here too." As though I had called her somehow. The waterworks then began. She accused me of attacking her and making the family feel ashamed by publishing the screenshots, but her voice faltered. She claimed that I, not she, was the source of the issues. She claimed that I had made everything public only to cause her embarrassment and trouble. I didn't shout or argue. I spoke steadily and assured her that I was only seeking the truth and wasn't making any personal attacks. After hearing what was going on, my fiancé, who had been sitting close by, approached. It was enough to ground me when he placed a hand on my shoulder and muttered, "Don't let them twist this." My mother's tone altered when she saw that I wasn't going to back down. After giving a loud sniff, she continued, "You only announced your engagement at the reunion to steal your sister's spotlight," which almost made me laugh aloud. I didn't think twice. Calmly, I informed her that, like my sister, I had every right to share good news about my life. No one was in competition with me. I informed her that none of this would have occurred if I had been invited in the first place. I could tell I had touched a nerve by the quiet that ensued. She chose to play the victim, which is her favorite approach, rather than admit anything. "It might be better if you don't attend family gatherings at all if you can't forgive us and move on," she remarked forcefully. And there it was, the final command. I remained calm. I refrained from crying. I simply exhaled and answered, "If that's how you feel, then fine," before hanging up. I sat there looking at the phone in my hand for a minute. My fiancé took a seat beside me and waited silently. I told him everything that had transpired, including my mom's accusation and ultimatum, as well as my dad's hesitant apology. "They're showing you exactly who they are," he continued, nodding. I lay in bed that night and gazed up at the ceiling. I kept replaying the phone call in my head. More than that, though, I began to reflect on all the events that had preceded this. I reflected on the holidays I had spent by myself since my siblings' families came first. My parents' constant comparisons of my unstable career to my brother's corner office and sister's work at the law company. The understated appearance. The contemptuous remarks. This was where it had all been leading. As I laid there, I came to the realization that I didn't deserve this. I wasn't worthy of fighting for meager affection or acting as though nothing was wrong. My siblings would always come first, as my family had often demonstrated to me. For the first time, I made the decision to stop pursuing those who made me feel inadequate. My fiancé sat down across from me and handed me a cup of coffee the following morning. He had a solemn expression. He remarked, "I've been thinking. How about hosting our own engagement celebration? Something modest, just those who genuinely stand by us." The concept sounded odd at first. I hadn't even considered celebrating without my family because they had been my default for so long. However, it made more sense the more I about it. Why should I continue to expend my energy on indifferent people? People that loved us for who we were, not who they wanted us to be, were the ones I wanted to celebrate this milestone with. After the reunion, we had a list of friends, my fiancé's family, and a couple of cousins who had gotten in touch with me privately. They all agreed that I was deserving of better treatment. I made the decision to focus on the folks who came to me unconditionally and let go of the things I couldn't control. I kept the celebration a secret from my parents and siblings. I was tired of trying to mend something that had been damaged for years and realized that it would only lead to more turmoil at this point. I was not going to plead for their affection or acceptance for the first time in my life. I had given up trying to find a family that didn't recognize me. At last, I was making my own decision. Fifth update, everything I didn't know I needed was provided at the engagement party. Just my fiancé's family, a few of my relatives who had been there for me through all the turmoil, and close friends made it modest and private. We arranged our backyard with string lights, served a variety of takeout and homemade cuisine, and adorned the tables with flowers that my fiancé had purchased from a nearby market. EasyJet ideal. Early in the evening, people began to arrive. I hadn't experienced such genuine enthusiasm at a family gathering in years, but the atmosphere was lighthearted and full of laughs. As soon as she got there, the cousin who had sent me the screenshots gave me a hug. "You're worthy of better," she said. She didn't mention the reunion, which I appreciated. "We're proud of you." An hour later, the biggest surprise arrived. Another car drew up to the curb, and my fiancé gave me a little shove. One of my aunts was leaving when I turned around. This aunt wasn't just any aunt though. She was the only one to privately text me to apologize and say she didn't know what had been going on following the group chat controversy. She was unexpected, but there she was, smiling warmly and holding a modest wrapped gift. As she entered the yard, she added, "I hope it's okay that I came?" She gave me a hug, and for a second I was speechless. "I wanted to see you both and say congratulations in person." I simply nodded and opened the door for her. It meant more to me than words could express to have her there. The folks who came through for me without reservation were more important than the statistics. Throughout the evening, my fiancé made a toast. The audience became silent as he lifted his glass. "To my future wife," he remarked with a smile, "I've seen her overcome so many obstacles and still come out stronger. Her character and the life we are creating together make me really proud." As the audience applauded, someone exclaimed, "To the happy couple." People who truly wanted to join us in celebrating were all around me as I stood there with my glass. I felt like I was being seen for the first time. There was only love, no backstabbing remarks, no comparisons, and no compulsion to prove anything. We stayed around the fire pit with a few pals and ended up wrapping things late. I was not mistaken when one of my relatives remarked, laughing, I haven't seen you this happy in years. After 2 weeks, I received an unexpected email. My dad gave it to me. Before I opened my email, I sat there looking at his name. He apologized first. It felt different this time. He acknowledged that, both during the reunion and in other instances prior to it, he had not defended me. He expressed guilt for not doing more to help me feel included and claimed he had no idea how much I had been harmed over the years. I know I haven't spoken anything when you needed me to, he wrote. Even though it might take some time, I hope we can begin repairing our friendship. I scrolled down after reading it twice. His addition at the bottom, your mom still doesn't see things the same way, caused me to pause. I'm not sure whether she will ever own up to her faults because she feels like the true victim in all of this. I also apologize for that. Although it hurt, it wasn't shocking. My mother had never taken responsibility for anything. I took some time to consider my response, and then I typed up a brief one. I praised my dad for getting in touch and let him know that while I valued his words, I value his deeds more. It would require work on all sides if he really wanted to rebuild things. I honestly didn't require a response, so I didn't anticipate one right away. I wasn't waiting for him to suddenly turn into the ideal father. His little step was plenty for now. However, I wouldn't accept compromises. I refused to put myself back in a situation where I didn't feel appreciated. Naturally, my sister couldn't help but stir things up. A few days later, I came upon one of her passive-aggressive Facebook posts. It was ambiguous but clear enough. It's funny how some people enjoy revealing personal details to get attention. Good or bad, family is family. I didn't answer. I didn't even give myself enough time to become upset about it. After blocking her, I simply went on. Her opinions, her sarcasm, and her judgment no longer had any influence over me. Life was fuller but quieter in the weeks that followed. I concentrated on running my company, organizing our wedding, and hanging out with the individuals who genuinely cared about me. I at last discovered serenity when I let go of the need to win my family's approval. In retrospect, I saw how much of my life had been wasted attempting to conform to a model that I was never meant to fit. Because I was different, my family had always made me feel inferior. However, that didn't prove me incorrect. Their incapacity to recognize my value was a reflection of them, not of me. Family is everything, as some people may say, and perhaps it is true for them. However, rather than condemnation and exclusion, family should be about love, respect, and support. I've never been happier as I'm finally creating a life with individuals that support me unconditionally. So here I am, going forth guilt-free and regret-free. I have no idea what the future holds for my parents or siblings, but I do know that I will never longer accept anything less than what I am worthy of. And to be honest, it feels really nice. Grandma's inheritance changed everything after my parents kicked me out and preferred my sister because of a missing bracelet. My sister was always given preference by my parents, who once expelled me for having a lost bracelet. They therefore arrived at my house in tears years later when my grandmother delivered me the family's inheritance in lieu of her. I grew up in a modest suburban home with 2 parents and a younger sister, which is what most people would consider a standard middle-class family. We appeared to be a picture-perfect family to outsiders. However, anyone who knew us well would tell you that my parents and I were constantly at odds. The explanation was straightforward. I was usually the last thing on their mind, and they loved my younger sister Emma. However, it wasn't always that way. I recall how devoted and kind my parents were to Emma and me when we were young. They lavished us with love, and for good reason. We were a rather intelligent couple who were excellent at everything. Nothing seemed to separate us during the golden age we shared. Both of us participated in gymnastics, art classes, and piano lessons, and our parents were equally pleased with us. There was no little favor for one of us over the other, and I never experienced any tension. But when I started 6th grade, everything changed. There was only one test at first. I received a poor grade, the first in my life, even though it wasn't a very significant one. It was sufficient for my parents to start viewing me in a different light. It was obvious to me that something had changed. When Emma brought home another flawless score, my mother wouldn't give me the same look that she gave Emma. While Emma's accomplishments were greeted with sincere pride, the praise they used to give me began to feel forced. All of a sudden, Emma was the one who could do no wrong and I was the loose thread that could unravel at any time. I initially believed it to be a passing phase. Perhaps I was being overly sensitive. However, it was impossible to ignore. I was held accountable for any mistakes I made, no matter how minor. Emma's mistakes were dismissed or, worse, forgiven. "She's just having an off day," my dad used to say. "Why can't you be more like Emma?" was my constant question. I was plagued with the statement during my adolescence. Emma became the daughter my parents had always desired as we grew older. She was gregarious, intelligent, and well-liked. She was the popular girl, the homecoming queen, and the class president. Conversely, my introversion increased. I studied hard, remained to myself, and succeeded in my own unique way. However, it was never sufficient to rival Emma. I eventually gave up trying. The disparities in our treatment had become starkly apparent by the time we were in high school. Emma always had her own car, brand new clothes, and all the attention. Our parents would spend hours sitting with her when she needed homework help, making sure she grasped every step. If I sought assistance, they would either dismiss me and instruct me to solve the problem on my own, or it would be too late in the evening. They had begun to treat Emma like a princess and treat me like an adult. Emma had everything given to her, but I quickly realized that if I wanted something, I would have to work for it. I made an effort to keep up my relationship with Emma in spite of the unequal treatment. She was my sister, after all, and I cherished her. However, it becomes increasingly difficult to overlook her increasing entitlement. Knowing she could get away with anything, she appeared to enjoy the attention. Emma was loved by more people than just my parents. Her allure enthralled our friends, instructors, and even complete strangers. I was the background darkness, and she was the shining girl. I started to question whether others truly viewed me for who I was or if I was merely Emma's sister. The pivotal moment occurred one summer following my high school graduation. I was eager to leave the house and start over after receiving a partial scholarship to a respectable college. I believed that my parents and I may get along better with some space and that they would eventually miss me when I was gone. I was mistaken. At this point, Emma began dating Jake, our high school football team's standout quarterback. He was well-liked, attractive, and from a rich family. Naturally, my folks adored him. They regarded him as though he were their son. My parents would prepare extravagant dinners to impress Jake, who spent every weekend at our place. They were obviously already looking forward to the day when Emma and Jake would tie the knot, start a family, and have the ideal grandchildren. I was working part-time to help pay for the expenses my scholarship didn't cover while I was having trouble getting through my first semester of college. Emma and Jake's most recent excursions or Emma's academic performance were the only topics I heard when I returned home after breaks, fatigued. Nobody inquired about me or my situation. They would also say sarcastic things like, "Why can't you find someone like Jake?" What remained of our family dynamic was devastated by the charges that followed. I came home for a visit one weekend when I was off from college. Before Emma's new bracelet, a gold charm bracelet that Jake had given her, vanished, everything appeared to be as usual. Emma was upset, and it was a costly item. In a state of complete panic, my parents tore the house apart in an attempt to find it. Emma speculated that perhaps I had taken it when they were unable to locate it. I initially believed her to be kidding, but she wasn't. The previous evening, she claimed to have witnessed me ogling the bracelet and hinted that I might have removed it out of envy. I was enraged. Her bracelet was untouchable by me. I hadn't given it a second consideration. My parents, however, believed her without hesitation. Of course, I objected. My folks wouldn't listen, even though I vowed I hadn't taken anything. They thought I had stolen it to get even. In fact, my father once remarked, "We always knew you were jealous of Emma." That was the most painful thing they had ever uttered. It seemed as though the years spent striving to be a good daughter and gain their approval had been in vain. They threatened to leave the house unless I returned the jewelry. What I was hearing was unbelievable. They didn't believe me even though I had my word and no evidence of my innocence. Their decisions had already been made, so I went out. I didn't turn around after packing my things and leaving the house. I severed all contact with them. I had no other option. I couldn't continue to live in a home where I was treated like a criminal for no fault of my own. To help me get back on my feet, I found a friend to stay with. I didn't talk to my parents again for years after that. Without the help of my family, I struggled in the ensuing years. I was left to do it all by myself. I struggled to make ends meet while balancing employment and education. On some days, I didn't think I would make it, but I did. After graduating, I secured a respectable career and gradually began to establish a life for myself. Emma was doing well in the meantime, according to mutual friends. She had secured a lucrative position at a marketing company, and she and Jake remained together. She had gotten into it with my father's help. For them, nothing appeared to have changed. Without me, they were still the ideal family. I didn't hear from my family for 5 years. My life had to be rebuilt from the ground up. My grandmother, my dad's mother, specifically, was the only one who provided me with any kind of assistance or spiritual support. I was unexpectedly invited to my grandmother's Christmas dinner. To put it mildly, I was taken aback. The only member of the family who had ever treated me fairly was my grandma. She never mentioned my parents or made an effort to get me to make amends with them, but she did occasionally send me a birthday card or text to check in after everything that had transpired. I wasn't sure if I wanted to go when I received the invitation, but I had a gut feeling that I should. It was like entering a time capsule when I got to the supper. Along with a few other family members, my parents, Emma, and even Jake were present. There was a noticeable tension. Emma pretended that nothing had ever happened between us, and my parents gave me a harsh welcome. They seemed to be expecting me to put the past behind me and comply with their ideal family act. I made it through the terrible night. My grandmother then began distributing gifts toward the end of the evening. I didn't have any big expectations, but my heart almost stopped as I opened the box. A gold locket, an ancient family relic that had been handed down through the years, was found within the box. The jewelry wasn't just any jewelry. This locket was thought to be the legitimate heir to the family's possessions. Grandma was giving it to me directly, ignoring her son, my father, and all the other grandchildren, including Emma, who had inherited it from her father. It represented more than merely custom. It implied that everything my grandparents had, including their home, land, and savings, would eventually belong to me. When my parents realized what had happened, I could see their faces become white. In stunned quiet, Emma, who had always been the golden kid, sat. I could sense the tension in the room as my parents rapidly changed their tone, trying to mask their amazement with fake grins. My parents quickly drew me aside after the awkward remainder of the meal. All of a sudden, they were remorseful, as though a few words of kindness could erase years of unfair treatment and neglect. They mentioned Emma's impending marriage and their desire for me to rejoin the family, for her benefit. However, I was aware. This was about money, not about love or family. Our family had always valued the heirloom, and they knew that I would be the one to inherit everything that went along with it now that I had it. They cared for me, thus they weren't worried about mending the relationship. They were concerned about their potential losses. In a tone that seemed more like a warning than an offer, my father even stated that they were prepared to forgive me for everything and begin anew. They seemed to have forgotten who had initially harmed them. Other family members also added their voices, advising me to exercise common sense. They insisted that regardless of what had previously transpired, family is everything, and that I should get back in touch with them. I could already hear the cliches piling up. You don't want to be alone, sharing is caring, and blood is thicker than water. I was overanalyzing the matter because of all this pressure, even though it was obvious what I should and shouldn't do. Knowing that they only appreciated me for what I now had, did I wish to rejoin this family? Given that their newfound interest in me was motivated by self-interest, could I forgive them? What recommendations do you have regarding this? If so, I'd be in dire need of some. First update. I felt overburdened when I returned to my flat following the Christmas celebration. It was difficult to take in all that had transpired. For the remainder of the evening, I made every effort to stay away from my parents and other family members, but they persisted in trying to come near to me. Emma would not quit grinning at me as though we were suddenly best friends, and my parents would not stop glancing at me with guilt. However, I was aware that their goals were more about the family riches connected to the artifact I had been given than they were about family. Their actions simply made me want to keep my distance. The days that followed were devoted to introspection. I understood that I needed to talk to Grandma in a suitable manner. The locket had useful applications in addition to its symbolic significance. It meant that I would get the family's possessions. Although I hadn't been searching for this, I needed clarification now that it was on my plate. I wasn't prepared to become entangled in family money and tradition without fully comprehending its significance. I was still anxious about bringing up the topic when I saw my grandmother. I asked her honestly what it all meant after thanking her for entrusting me with the relic. I wanted to be open and honest. I informed her that if it meant bringing me back into the instability I had fought so hard to avoid, I didn't want the family's riches. Although they weren't my top concern, I promised her that I would use the assets sensibly if they came my way. Grandma patiently listened. Then she explained something to me that I didn't fully comprehend previously. She had spent years observing all of this. She had witnessed the family's growing estrangement from her, particularly following the argument between my parents and myself. She clarified that she was aware of the dysfunctional family dynamics and the harsh treatment I had received, especially from Emma and my parents. She was even aware of the fact that Emma was always given a free pass while I had to work several jobs to make ends meet during my time in college. Grandma acknowledged that she hadn't gotten involved for so long because she thought individuals should be allowed to live their own lives. However, she realized that her assets needed to be transferred to the appropriate person after witnessing how things had turned out, How I had been mistreated but had still managed to create something for myself. Someone who wouldn't waste it or take it for granted. She picked me because of this. My name was on her will, which she had already made. Her honesty astonished me. The heirloom was no longer the only consideration. Trust was at issue. Grandma trusted me to take care of everything, and that duty felt significant and weighty. She reassured me that this was about entrusting the family's future to people she knew would uphold it, not about compensating me for what I had endured. Even though it seemed odd to find myself in this situation all of a sudden, I couldn't help but feel validated. Grandma had seen the truth, and it meant more than anything else, therefore all those years of being the forgotten daughter suddenly didn't matter. But although this made a lot of things clearer, it also made things more complicated. The inheritance remained a threat, and I was certain that my parents and Emma would do all in their power to regain control now that they were aware of the consequences. They had no intention of letting it go lightly. Second update. Hi everyone on Reddit. When I return with an update, the situation has gotten worse. If you have been following along, you are aware of how chaotic my family situation is. I was mistaken to believe that returning to school would bring me any calm. I went back to my flat in the hopes of escaping the drama following the Christmas debacle, in which Emma and my parents essentially begged for the family inheritance. I tried to ignore my family's incessant calls and texts by immersing myself in my work for a few days. Naturally, though, such tranquility was short-lived. Not only did Emma and my parents keep sending texts, but so did the rest of my family. Suddenly, relatives who hadn't spoken to me in years felt obligated to settle the conflict. They were all repeating the same phrases. Don't let money tear you apart. Family is everything, and, my personal favorite, you're being selfish. The fact that these relatives were unaware of the entire scenario only made matters worse. While Emma had it all and lived the ideal life, they were not around when my parents disowned me or when I had to scrounge for food and rent while attending college. They only cared about what they had heard from my parents, who were now neatly playing the victims, and didn't give a damn about the years of abuse. Their opinions suffocated me. Before things took a startling turn, I believed I could just ignore everything and concentrate on my work. Emma and my dad unexpectedly came up to my apartment one afternoon. You read correctly, they showed up at my house without my invitation. They seemed to have a purpose, which was to coerce me into making amends or something, of course on their terms. I could hear my mother sobbing from the hallway as they pounded on the door and called my name. I went cold. After several months of being with me, my friend appeared frightened, and I was at a loss for what to do. My parents began begging me in front of my pal as soon as I opened the door. My mother was crying as she talked about how they couldn't let me go and how we had to make things right. As though I had done something wrong, my dad said that they were willing to forgive me for everything. Emma, meanwhile, was standing there pretending to be worried, but I could see straight through her. She was more concerned about what would happen if I didn't agree to split the inheritance than she was about making amends. They weren't listening to me when I tried to keep the topic quiet and told them that this wasn't the right time or place for it. While my dad stayed in the doorway, refusing to leave, my mom virtually shoved past me in an attempt to enter the apartment. They kept interrupting me to talk about Emma's impending marriage and the necessity to restore the family's unity before that could happen. They tried to coerce me into agreeing to give up a portion of the future inheritance, which, mind you, I didn't even formally receive yet, by making it seem like I was the one destroying the family. It was a humiliating scene. My neighbors began to emerge from their rooms to observe the mayhem. I was doing everything I could to keep it quiet, but the more they lingered, the louder they became. Emma stood there looking smug, as though she knew they would finally wear me down, while my mom was on her knees pleading with me to forgive them. I was stuck and didn't know what to do. They refused to budge when I told them to go. After what seemed like hours of begging, I finally had enough and phoned security. Fortunately, security showed up right away. At first, they asked my parents to leave in a courteous manner, but they refused. Security had to step in at that point and threatened to call the police if they didn't leave. It was a whole new level of embarrassment. Before my parents ultimately gave in, my mother made a huge public announcement that I was leaving my home. Emma went one step farther, as if that wasn't enough. She informed a number of my friends via mass text after she left that I had deserted her and my parents. She cleverly omitted the part where they had disowned me for something I didn't even do, making it seem like I was the bad guy in this whole situation. I had to explain the entire thing to some of my friends because they were understandably perplexed. It was draining, and I was astounded by the extent Emma would go to in order to appear to be the victim. I'm not sure what to do right now. I'm attempting to move on and haven't spoken to my parents since that happened, but I can't help but watch over them because of their desperation. I feel like I'm being forced into a difficult situation where I have to give in order to please everyone else. However, I will never forget the way they treated me. However, the pressure is too much to handle. A part of me questions whether this will ever end or if I will have to live with it forever. It seems like my family is desperate to pull me back into their mess, even though right now I simply want to concentrate on me and my future. Third update, greetings once more Reddit users. Hold on tight, for after my last report, things have become considerably worse. To be honest, though, I wasn't sure I wanted anything to do with them anymore after everything. I couldn't help but wonder, what's keeping them from turning on me again if it was so simple to do so based only on a story? What assurance did I have that my parents wouldn't act in the same way if a new circumstance arose, given their ability to change their minds so swiftly in the past, supporting Emma and rejecting me? I felt as though I would have to be cautious around them all the time, wondering if their devotion to me was sincere or merely practical. I would want to put myself first and take a vacation from them all for the time being. Don't bring me back into their mess, let them handle it on their own. My parents also contacted me again after all of this, but they spoke in a different tone. They stopped pressuring me and making me feel guilty. They nearly apologized, but I could see they weren't sincere. In order to obtain the future inheritance, they were still concentrating on the money and trying to make things go as smoothly as possible. They were more concerned with maintaining appearances and ensuring financial stability than they were with actually repairing our relationship, particularly now that Emma's future wasn't looking as stable as they had planned. To be honest, I haven't replied to them and I'm not sure I will. Even if they come with an apology, I'm not prepared to open that door again because this entire event has served as a brutal reminder of how toxic my family can be. I'm concentrating on myself and the future I want to create on my own terms, free from the burden of their deceit and manipulation, for the time being. Reddit, that's enough for now. I appreciate all of your guidance and help during this journey. I feel like I'm now beginning to see things more clearly, even though it's been a difficult journey. My wife brought her boyfriend home to announce her pregnancy. A web of lies, gun threats, and betrayal that shattered our family forever. Unaware that I was filming everything, my wife brought her boyfriend home to announce her pregnancy, but when I brought up the subject of divorce, he threatened me with a gun. Both of them are currently being charged with crimes. Sarah, 45F, and I, 47M, have been wed for 22 years. We were married shortly after graduating from college, having met through mutual acquaintances. My first and only committed relationship was with Sarah. While I developed my profession in software development, she worked as a marketing executive. Before everything broke apart last month, I believed that our marriage was going well. Our two children are Mike, 17M, a high school junior, and Jenny, 20F, a psychology major in her second year in college. Sarah joined a new gym approximately 4 months ago, which is when the issue began. She stated that she wished to lose weight before her 46th birthday. She stated that she would rather go alone in order to concentrate on herself, but I agreed with her choice and even offered to accompany her. I was initially pleased to see her taking care of herself. She began going to the gym more frequently, sometimes twice a day. I didn't question it because it appeared like she was happier and more lively. Then, however, things began to shift. She altered her haircut, bought brand new clothes, and spent all of her time on her phone. She would immediately switch apps or turn off her phone screen when I entered the room. She also said that her team had taken on a large project for a new customer, which caused them to start working late. She wouldn't always return home until 9 or 10 o'clock at night. I didn't give it much thought because I had total faith in her. I even took care of the kids' needs so she could concentrate on her work and made sure dinner was ready for her when she got home. However, we had less sex. She always had an excuse for not wanting to get intimate, like she was exhausted, had a headache, or had to get up early. For nearly 3 months, we went from having personal moments 2 or 3 times a week to none at all. I assumed she was under stress at work, so I didn't bring up the subject again. She texted me on a Friday night 3 weeks ago, stating that she needed to talk to me about something crucial. I assumed she wanted to discuss our forthcoming summer vacation plans or that she had received the promotion she had been looking for. We had the home to ourselves because Mike was at football practice and Jenny was at her university library. Sarah wasn't by herself when she got home. She was accompanied by a tall, strong man who was most likely in his late 30s. Derek, 39 million, was his name when she introduced him. Sarah revealed to us that she was 3 months pregnant and that Derek was the father as we sat down in the living room, the same space where we had celebrated our 20th anniversary 2 years prior. She claimed that they had a strong connection after meeting at the gym 8 months prior. She claimed that although she hadn't been content in our marriage for years, she had never had the guts to speak up. She said I didn't comprehend her emotional needs since I was too preoccupied with my work. With a smug expression on his face, Derek simply sat there, periodically massaging Sarah's back as though to console her. She clarified that they intended to begin a new life together after falling in love. She had spent the late evenings with him, not at work. They were meeting at the gym and going to his apartment, so it wasn't always just for working out. I thought I was in a strange nightmare. This woman, who had shed happy tears at Jenny's high school graduation, was the one who had helped me recover from pneumonia 3 years prior. She was seated in our house now, telling me that she was expecting a kid from another man. I told them both to get out right away. Things became ugly at that point. Derek got up and began shouting that since Sarah owned half the house, I couldn't throw her out. According to him, I had to man up and acknowledge that Sarah had moved on to someone better. I remained composed and informed them that they had to leave my house immediately because I would be filing for divorce early on Monday morning. Puffing up his chest like some phony macho person, Derek got in my face. Since he wouldn't allow me to interfere with his woman and his baby, he advised me to keep an eye on myself. I was uneasy about his tone, so I had already begun recording everything on my phone and partially concealed it behind a cushion on the couch. I said again that they had to go. Derek took a gun out of his waistband at that point. He pointed it right at my chest and threatened to make sure I felt bad if I attempted to make things tough on Sarah during the divorce. He claimed to be aware of my workplace, the children's school, and the fact that accidents happen all the time. Sarah remained silent as this man brandished a gun and threatened her husband of 22 years. She didn't act shocked that he was carrying a firearm, nor did she attempt to stop him. Her face was expressionless as she stared. I immediately phoned the police when they left and played the recording for them. Derek was taken into custody that evening for threatening to commit a crime while brandishing a lethal weapon. Sarah was also taken into custody for her involvement in the threat. The following day, they were both released on bail. Everything fell apart when the children noticed the police cruisers outside our house when they got home. When I told Jenny what had happened, she started crying. Mike secluded himself in his bedroom for 2 days after punching a hole in the wall. He only came out when I assured him that we would overcome this together. Both parents have been phoning constantly. Sarah informed her parents that I had been emotionally distant and that she felt stuck in our marriage, so they believe I'm being too severe and should drop the charges because she's pregnant and stressed. In contrast, my parents are enraged and want me to pursue every aspect of the divorce. I filed for divorce the following morning. According to my attorney, the tape will be very beneficial for the divorce and criminal case. Sarah has been phoning and messaging nonstop, accusing Derek of manipulating her and claiming she made a horrible error. She asserted that she would never wish to harm me and was unaware that he was armed. However, the footage reveals that she didn't appear startled or afraid when he produced the firearm. I've instructed her to contact us solely through our attorneys and blocked her number. The children won't talk to her. Jenny claims that she will never be able to forgive her mother for ruining our family. In addition to failing 2 classes, Mike's football coach called to report that he had been fighting during practice. We lost 22 years of marriage because she was unable to remain faithful. I glanced at our wedding pictures last night. We were quite joyful and youthful. I now have to go in court against her for the threats charge the following week. I have no regrets about bringing charges. In my own home, no one brandishes a pistol to threaten me, certainly not in front of the pictures of my kids that hang on the wall. First update. 2 weeks have passed since my last post. I want to start by saying thank you to everyone for their encouraging words and remarks. When I thought everything was crumbling, you kept me going. Let me now explain what has transpired since then. Last week was the hearing for the threat case. My lawyer and I got to the courthouse early. Derek and Sarah arrived together, both dressed as though they were attending church. Sarah kept attempting to get my attention, but I was preoccupied with my phone. Their attorney, a slick man in a fancy suit, attempted to portray me as an angry, domineering spouse who threatened to leave Sarah bankrupt and homeless. He asserted that Derek only displayed the firearm out of concern for Sarah's security. The recording was then played by my lawyer. Everything was audible, including Derek's threats to find out where my children attended school and, most significantly, Sarah's total quiet while her lover brandished a gun to threaten her husband. Their features turned pale. The trial date was scheduled for next month by the clearly irate judge. Additionally, she issued a restraining order that mandates they both keep at least 500 feet away from me, my home, and my place of employment. I was mistaken to believe that would be the most significant change. My door was knocked on yesterday morning. A woman in her mid-30s was standing there holding a big folder when I opened it. She identified herself as Derek's wife, Amy, 36F. Yes, you read correctly. Derek is married and has 3 children, ages 9, 6, and 12. After reading about Derek's arrest in the local newspaper, Amy learned about Sarah and the pregnancy. She has been conducting her own research ever since, and the results are startling. She presented evidence that Derek had previously done this. He got acquainted with a woman at his former job 2 years ago, got her pregnant, and then vanished when she was 7 months pregnant. The mother was forced to return to her parents' house and raise the child by herself. Here's where it gets worse though. Amy showed me text messages from months ago that were exchanged between Derek and Sarah. They were scheming, not only having an affair. To obtain the majority of my assets in the divorce, they had a full plan in place. The texts indicated that they believed Sarah would receive a larger payout if they could incite me to act violently or foolishly. The threat of a gun wasn't spontaneous, rather, it was planned. Derek wrote the following in a message: "I'll contribute when we inform him. I'll give him a small scare if he becomes hostile. In this manner, you will receive everything and he would know not to fight the divorce." Sarah answered, "Great plan, sweetie. He will most likely cry because he is such a coward. I sent the DA's office and my attorney all of this proof. In addition to the current threats charge, the DA is now thinking of charging conspiracy." Sarah began phoning me nonstop after learning of the new proof, crying and saying she was unaware Derek was married. She said that he tricked her into agreeing to the entire scheme. The text messages, however, indicate otherwise. She was fully aware of his wife and children. As the other woman, she even made jokes about Amy being too stupid to notice her husband's affair. As Jenny searched Sarah's drawer for some old family photos, the situation became even more intriguing. I was unaware that she had discovered a second phone. It had communications from over a year ago. Before revealing their pregnancy, Sarah and Derek had been preparing for this for months. Because they believed that I wouldn't fight back as hard if there was a baby involved, they purposely waited until she was showing before telling me. The effect on our children has been catastrophic. Except for school, Mike still hardly ever leaves his room. His football coach called to report that he has been watching from the stands throughout practices, and he has now failed 3 classes. Jenny is constantly upset. She texted Sarah to let her know she was dead to her and that she would never want to see her again. "You'll understand when you're older and fall in love," was the straightforward message Sarah wrote back. I provided copies of the text messages to Sarah's parents, who then came to my house. They were appalled. In my living room, her father, who had been arguing for her behavior and pleading with me to dismiss the charges, started crying. He insisted that he didn't bring up his daughter to be like way. They no longer answer her calls either. According to my attorney, Sarah won't receive anything in the divorce because of this new information. She will lose the property division because of the deliberate nature of their scheme and the conspiracy to scare me. But in all honesty, I simply want her out of our lives and don't care about the money anymore. I'm not married to the woman in those text messages. She is a stranger who sat in our bed and ate meals with our family for months, planning how to ruin me. Yesterday, Jenny inquired if I ever had any suspicions. In actuality, I didn't. I had total faith in Sarah. I never imagined that she would do this, even while she was working late, going to the gym twice a day, and no longer wanting to be intimate. After 22 years of marriage, I never once asked her late at night or checked her phone. I now see that she called me a stupid for having faith in her and laughed at my trust in her partner. Second update. My last update was 1 month ago. Things have taken a number of unexpected turns since the divorce proceedings began last week. Since what has transpired is so amazing, I must share it. Sarah tried to play victim at the start of the divorce court. She said that Derek had forced and persuaded her into taking part in their plan. In a tearful account, her attorney described how Derek used her loneliness as a weak woman stuck in an emotionally distant marriage. She also called a coworker to testify about how she used to cry about our allegedly tumultuous marriage in the break room. However, following the events of the criminal trial, her act utterly collapsed. Derek chose to accept a plea bargain since he was facing severe jail time for the gun threat. If he testified about their conspiracy, the DA offered him a restraining order and 2 years of probation. He accepted the offer, and everything changed when he came clean in court. Derek threw Sarah under the bus during his plea hearing. He acknowledged that she had come up with the entire plan from the beginning. She knew he was a successful real estate agent from his social media and had seen him at the gym. Instead of going the other way, she went to him. He testified that she had checked his Facebook profile and seen photos of his family, so she knew he was married from the start. Derek claims that Sarah told him she wanted to leave me because she was unhappy in her marriage, but she wanted to make sure she received the highest settlement possible. She specifically picked him since he had a concealed carry permit and an imposing appearance. She came up with the threat of a pistol. She believed that when I invariably reacted aggressively to threats, it would demonstrate my abuse. When the paternity test results were revealed in court, however, it was the biggest shock. Derek is not the father, but Sarah is unquestionably pregnant. Her personal trainer, a 25-year-old man called Chad, is the owner of the child. It seems that she was having an affair with Chad at the gym while she was hatching plans with Derek. Derek lost it all when this information was revealed in court. He began to yell that she had damaged his marriage for no reason at all. He believed that she would divorce me, seize half of my possessions, and then wed him. He was furious to learn that she had been sleeping with someone else the whole time. He had to be taken out of the courtroom by the bailiffs. Chad was subpoenaed and appeared to testify. He was unaware of Sarah's marriage. She informed him that she was divorced and that her father was the parent of her 2 grown children. She even introduced Jenny and Mike as her niece and nephew while they were at the gym. In the court correspondence, Chad displayed Sarah's invitation to move in with him following the completion of her divorce from her abusive ex-husband. What little credibility Sarah still had was shattered by this revelation. Her own attorney seems repulsed. After the court declared a recess, Sarah completely lost it when we got back. The judge was unimpressed as she began to scream about how everyone was against her and that she was just trying to find happiness. Sarah's career has collapsed in the interim. When her firm reported the court cases via a background check for a promotion, it discovered the conspiracy and the criminal charges. Because of their zero-tolerance policy for unethical activity, they fired her right away. The tale has gone viral in our professional network, and she hasn't been able to find another marketing job. Since she is unable to pay for an apartment, she has now moved in with her sister. Sarah continued attempting to get in touch with the children, sending lengthy emails expressing her regret and pleading for their support throughout her pregnancy. Mike still won't even acknowledge her existence. Jenny replied once, telling her, "I hope the baby grows up to betray you, just like you betrayed us." The fact that Mike has now resumed speaking is a good development. Although he continues to receive poor grades, he is improving and attending twice-weekly therapy sessions. We're working on appropriate ways for him to vent his frustrations, and the therapist thinks that his anger management problems are normal given the situation. Now that the judge has seen all the evidence, the text messages plotting the conspiracy, the paternity test results demonstrating she lied about Derek being the father, and the testimony on her numerous affairs, the divorce proceedings are advancing swiftly. According to my lawyer, we should be done in about a month. I received a call from Sarah's sister yesterday alerting me to the fact that Sarah is not handling this well. Despite being pregnant, she has been drinking a lot and complaining about how everyone has failed her when she most needs them. Until I recalled those texts in which she made fun of using Derek's gun to intimidate me, I was on the verge of feeling terrible for her. Third update. I can finally declare that my nightmare is gone, as it started 6 months ago. Last month, the divorce was finalized. The judge gave me Mike's primary custody in the house. Since Jenny is an adult, custody was not a concern. Sarah only received her car and personal items. The judge explained the uneven division by pointing to her many deceptions and conspiracy with Derek. Sarah's entire existence has collapsed. Complications caused her to lose the baby at 5 months. Despite everyone's warnings, her sister admitted to me that she had been drinking excessively during her pregnancy. The real father and personal trainer, Chad, is opposed to her. He left his work at the gym and relocated to a different city after discovering her falsehoods and the plot with Derek. After their divorce, Derek's wife Amy was granted full custody of their children. Due to the criminal allegations, he lost his real estate license and relocated to Arizona. As far as I know, he works as a bartender and tells everyone he meets how Sarah destroyed his life. Last week, Sarah's downward spiral reached its lowest point. She arrived at our house at 2 in the morning, utterly inebriated, and yelled in the driveway that she had lost everything due to one mistake. She insisted that she would stop at nothing to make things right and return home. Before I could, the neighbors phoned the police. She was jailed for 2 days for violating the restraining order. Sarah needed to face repercussions for the first time in her life, according to her sister, who declined to save her. The children are at last improving. Jenny has returned to college and is seeing the campus counselor on a regular basis. She claims that joining a support group for kids of divorced parents is assisting her in processing everything. Mike is back on the football team and his grades have improved to B's and C's. His therapist claims that since he has acquired some coping skills, his anger management problems have much improved. Through all of this, Sarah's parents have shown surprisingly strong support. They have severed all communication with Sarah, but they have kept up a relationship with the children. Like she used to do when Sarah and I were first married, her mom comes over every Sunday to prepare dinner for us. On some weekends, her dad takes Mike fishing and helps him repair the hole he punched in his bedroom wall. I've begun dating a person I met via a common friend. 3 years ago, Lisa, a 43-year-old high school teacher, went through her own divorce. We are moving extremely slowly. Since she tutored Mike in English and improved his grade, the youngsters, who met her last month, appear to like her. She is considerate of our circumstances and doesn't demand more than I am willing to provide. Yesterday, Sarah gave me a call from a new number. She claimed to be going to AA meetings and to have been sober for 2 weeks. She asked if I might think about giving her another chance. I blocked the number and hung up without answering. There are some betrayals from which you simply cannot recover. We're getting over it, but the kids are still dealing with it. Last week, Jenny expressed her pride in my handling of the situation, saying that I stood by them and refused to allow Sarah to re-establish her influence over us. When he turned 18, Mike requested if he could adopt my last name. He declared that he no longer desired any relationship with Sarah. Even though life isn't flawless, we're making progress. Sarah must now live with the decision she made. I don't regret the way I handled the situation. Showing your children that it's acceptable to take toxic people out of your life, even if that person is their mother, can be the most difficult aspect of being a parent. I'm genuinely looking forward to the future for the first time in months as we create a new normal. My parents skipped my wedding for my brother. Now their world is falling apart as the truth unravels. My parents put my brother first once more, and now their world is falling apart, so I only disclosed my wedding after it had already taken place. Mike, 21 million, is the younger brother of me, 27 female. He is the epitome of a mama's boy and a man-child, always whining and demanding respect from others. My parents have worried about him ever since he was born. He did not have a difficult birth and does not have special needs. My parents totally abandoned me when he was just born. In particular, my mother EIF changed from being a devoted mother to one of those boy moms that people make fun of online. Even though my father, 50 million, still loved and supported me, he has always been too cowardly to challenge my mother and let me win, not even once. Only my 76-year-old grandfather defended me. He never liked my siblings and often criticized my parents for their actions. He claims that we have a really particular link and that I make him think of his late wife, my grandma. I don't get to see him very frequently because he lives on the opposite side of the nation. Mike enjoys making fun of me since he knows our mother likes him. We've always been at odds because of this and his general conduct. He's a brat, pampered, and a terrible person. I can't even remember how many times I've been in trouble for stuff he framed me for or for performing things better than him. He received a scholarship to a prestigious out-of-state institution because football is his only talent. My parents said my college fund had been spent to pay for bills following a fire, so they didn't spend a single penny on my schooling. I found out years later that Mike had really received money to purchase a house and a car. Lucas and I met at my public university. There, he was the first person with whom I really clicked. I met new friends, of course, and they are now my closest pals. I was able to leave my parents' place because of them and Lucas, who had been my best friend for years before we started dating. Lucas and I are now both highly respected in our professions and make excellent money. The principal problem: a year ago, Lucas asked me to marry him. We didn't make a big deal out of it or broadcast it on social media since we're pretty private. My folks simply said, "That's nice," when I informed them, and I'm beginning to believe they didn't even hear me. With our closest friends and family, we chose a modest yet elegant ceremony and reception. Lucas persuaded me to extend an invitation to my brother and parents, but they never did. Every time I went to visit, my mother would interrupt me and begin discussing my brother's achievements and exploits, without indicating that it was a wedding. I'd had enough at one point. I cut her off and explained that I had an event scheduled for a certain day that couldn't be changed. She informed me that they were unable to go since they had to be there for my brother's final game of the season. Naturally, I was not surprised by this obvious preference. For identical reasons, they had missed my high school and university graduations as well as my ballet recitals. I chose to be petty at that moment. I didn't press my parents to attend the event after telling them it was okay for them to do so. I purposely omitted the fact that this event was actually my wedding. Advanced flash. I got married a couple of weeks ago. It was ideal. We had a great time with my family, Lucas's family, and our friends present. Everything went perfectly, and my grandpa was overjoyed to give me away. When several of my relatives questioned me about why my parents weren't present, I answered honestly that they couldn't since they had to go to my brother's game. Nothing out of the ordinary happened, though I did get a few glares for it, and my grandfather was noticeably upset for a bit. Lucas and I left for our honeymoon after the celebration, and we didn't use our phones at all. But upon our return, we encountered a storm, both real and imagined. My phone was flooded with alerts when I turned it back on. The majority came from my brother and mother. Because one of my paternal aunts had shared wedding pictures on Facebook with a barely veiled jab at my parents, particularly my mother, for missing the wedding, Mike called me a variety of derogatory things. My parents received criticism from the public for their treatment of me when the post went viral in their neighborhood. As it happens, my grandfather came to visit my parents in person to deliver a harsh lecture, humiliating my father, his son, to the point of tears. This appeared to be the tipping moment for my father. He eventually rebelled against my mom, threatening to file for divorce unless she made amends, because he was so upset about missing his only daughter's wedding and getting his father's displeasure. My mom has been bombarding my phone with messages, and it looks like this is the reason. The letters began as threats and insults but soon evolved into pleading for forgiveness and throwing sympathy parties. Right now, my spouse and I are at home debating how to respond to the circumstance. Many of my family members have apologized for what I went through, including those I didn't invite to the wedding. They say they were unaware that this was taking place at home. Since most of them reside in separate states or on the opposite side of the nation from my grandfather, I can't hold them responsible. My mom's sisters and friends, however, have been making fun of me for not telling her about the wedding directly. They maintain that she is upset over missing it. I'm not positive, but I believe she's just trying to save face. My parents' most recent communications appear to be quite sad and regretful that they were unable to attend my wedding. My family is now split into 3 groups: the majority, who support me, my maternal aunts, who shame me for allegedly offending my mother, and my maternal grandparents, who demand that I pardon my mother because she has made an effort to make amends. My closest pals are telling me not to pay attention to them. Edit, answering frequently asked questions. Did I tell my parents I was getting married? Indeed, I did. All of my guests received conventional paper invitations, and I was informed that they had all arrived. Mike, my parents, some distant relatives, and some Lucas family members didn't reply. I sent follow-up mails to verify that I was there. Those who did not respond informed me that they were unable to attend. I texted my brother and mom to ask, but they ignored me. I didn't bother pressing further because I was aware of their past and had everything planned. Why didn't I reschedule the wedding? I was dismissed each time I pushed on emphasizing my celebrations to get an answer because I had already been informed that there was my brother's game. It seemed that some things were just more essential than me, therefore I was frequently told it wasn't important and to quit being pissy and bothersome. It wasn't worth the effort, so I think it's fair that I quit pressing at this point. To see if my parents would even be interested, I refrained from informing them outright that I was getting married. Naturally, they didn't. I talked candidly about my wedding with my aunts and uncles in spite of this. Several times when I spoke with my aunt about venues or clothing stores, my mother was in the room. She was talking to people or on the phone at different moments. She was never attentive. She would smile, say, "That's great, dear," and then move on whenever I brought it up during reunions. Dad and Mike were silent on the radio. I had previously experienced harassment whenever I attempted to go no contact, NC. They never went to my high school, bachelor's, or master's graduations because of things involving my brother, and I was humiliated for having the audacity to abandon my family. This was passed down from my maternal aunts and grandparents in addition to my parents and brother. Lucas was the pivotal moment. Shortly after my previous attempt at going NC, we began dating, and with his encouragement, I now feel more secure in my position. I wasn't as confident in myself before then. I attempted to inform my paternal family about my parents' treatment when I was 14 years old. My parents pretended to be apologetic while my aunts, uncles, and grandfather chastised them. After we arrived home, I was subjected to lifelong gaslighting and beatings for lying. I continued to communicate with my paternal side but, out of fear, kept the abuse a secret. My grandpa was the only one who knew, but he was constantly warned that if he attempted to step in, he would lose my favor. My parents don't know my new address, and I reside an hour away from their little town. This is deliberate. My mother supported my brother's attempt to break into my former apartment to steal money, saying, "Siblings share their goods." I've since relocated, and I'll make sure they never find out where I live. My college funds were not immediately spent by my parents. After lying about needing it for costs, they used it to purchase a house close to my brother's college when he started his freshman year and a car for his 16th birthday. Until it met their needs, they did not touch the fund. I want to start by saying thank you to everyone who read my story and wished my husband and I luck. I am so appreciative of your encouraging words, affection, and criticism. The response has exceeded my expectations by a wide margin. To people who think my tale isn't true, I'm glad your family life is better than mine, even if you consider my reality to be a fantasy. But I would really appreciate it if you would quit teasing me and DMing me to say that I'm fabricating a tale to get attention. If I missed anything in the first post, it was because I was so distraught and crying over the abuse I was experiencing from my family. Keeping a modicum of civility would be appreciated, but you are not obligated to read or believe my narrative. It was obvious from the invitation that it was a wedding. There are no justifications for ignorance. The wedding was not attended by my maternal side of the family. While some sent gifts but chose not to attend, the majority were busy. I'm not sure why they didn't talk to my mother about my wedding. I'm not like I live in their heads. My mother essentially apologized by SMS as part of her purported atonement. This past week has been a little chaotic. I took a few days off from Reddit to collect my thoughts. After that, Lucas and I talked for a long time about what to do. I don't think I could ever love him more than I do now since he has been my rock. Although talking about my parents was never acceptable to me, Lucas gave me a harsh reality check that I really needed. We came to the conclusion that it wasn't healthy for me to stay in touch, stick around, and not go no contact, NC. I came to the realization that I never really went NC because deep down, I still needed their approval. I know it's pathetic, but it's like a drug. My parents can be warm, hilarious, loving, and caring when we're together, until they're not. You want their praise so badly that you ruin yourself because of the little affection they offer you, which makes you need more. However, that is sufficient. I made a self-promise that things would change. After giving it some thought, I made the decision to go NC with everyone who made a fuss out of this situation and to begin therapy, for good this time. I messaged my father after thinking about it for days, telling him that I would meet him, Mom, and Mike somewhere neutral if he wanted to chat. He agreed right away. We met at the park the following day. We were joined in repairing the damage by my father's siblings and sisters. It appeared as though my father had been crying for some time. My mother appeared the same, but it appeared to be more embarrassed and angry. My sibling appeared irritated. I explained to them how I had always been harmed by their acts and preference for my brother, and how their abusive behavior had led me to conclude that I did not want to speak to any of them ever again. My mother made several attempts to interrupt me during the meeting, but my aunt, who made the Facebook post, always stopped her. They had no genuine response when I questioned why they were treating me in this manner. My uncle chastised my dad for constantly sobbing and apologizing without providing an explanation. My mother finally acknowledged, "I just didn't like you." As though she were asking herself that question for the first time. Simple enough. My brother? He acknowledged that it was like a sport to him to get attention and make me miserable. I asked more questions. They said they never received my invitation when I questioned why they never replied. They denied ever seeing the texts when I presented them. As it happens, they were speaking the truth. My folks weren't home when they received the wedding invitation. When my brother saw the invitation, he tore it up and threw it away when he was there for the weekend. My parents erased my texts after I sent them. He said it was simple because he had archived my chat so they wouldn't receive any notices. I was upset. I had to stop Lucas from striking Mike in the face when I asked him why he would do such a thing. He shrugged and said, it wasn't as important as the stuff we had planned. Oddly enough, my folks were furious and started berating Mike. In response, he threw a fit and started crying like a crocodile. To be honest, I was grimly satisfied as I saw it happen. My mother then made an attempt to brush things off, saying that everything had been worked out and that there was no need to fuss over a miscommunication. She went so far as to say that I should clear their identity. That irritated me. I cut her off and informed her that they were not at all forgiven. Their years of negligence were not undone by Mike's disdain for the invitation. In addition, they ought to have inquired about my wedding, which had been clear. Are you curious about my mother's reaction? She sincerely believed Lucas didn't like me and would never marry me, saying, I did hear you talking about a wedding of yours, but I just thought you were being delusional and seeking my attention with exaggerated scenarios. Believe me when I say that I was on the verge of losing my patience. Additionally, it was discovered that my brother didn't even have a football game to go to. In order to dodge my event, my parents made up a tale about how my husband, friends and I don't know much about football, we prefer soccer, and how I stopped asking about it when Mike made fun of me in high school. Since Lucas and I are blocked on social media and my brother has private accounts, I was unable to verify or deny the existence of a game at the time I made the original post. I foolishly believed what my parents said. But no. Do you want to know where the man-child actually went? Mike wanted to go to Disneyland, so they did. My brother's 100th tantrum vacation was covered by the football news. They had apparently done this several times in the previous months. The sheer volume of material I had discovered at that time left me exhausted and overwhelmed. I lost my temper when I realized how horribly I had been duped. I got up and told my father that he was a weak, depressed man who couldn't defend his child without his wife's consent. I informed my brother that he was a worthless justification for a guy who would never achieve anything in his life and would always live like the useless leech that he is. I told my mother that she was the worst narcissist and that she was a worthless little woman who was so irrelevant that she didn't even merit attention or condemnation. I went on to say that she was too rotten for even God to save. I understand. Harsh. Halfway through my tirade, my mother jumped up from her chair to yell at me, but I was too angry. She became so enraged that it appeared as though steam was escaping from her ears when I yelled at her to shut up, sit down, and listen for once. After that, all I can recall is that I continued to babble non-stop. All of my hurt and rage seemed to pour forth. I believe the park as a whole fell silent at one point. I told Mike and my parents that I was disowning them all and that if they were wise, they would never contact me again. My brother and parents were left to the mercy of my aunts and uncles as I snatched up my pocketbook and departed with Lucas, Anna, and Francis. I eventually had a panic attack on the drive home once the reality of what I had just heard and learned hit me. Anna helped me navigate it while Lucas was driving till we pulled into a parking area so I could relax. I am incredibly appreciative of their assistance. I threw myself onto the bed as soon as I got home and fell asleep. I really wanted to do what you said and share the entire discussion on Facebook, but I couldn't do it because of my job and profession. Sharing my tale anonymously on Reddit is one thing, posting my identity and face all over Facebook is quite another. That was not a route I could take. I did something better instead. I gave the woman in charge of my mom's church a folder that contained all of my mother's derogatory messages and terrible remarks. My mom put a lot of effort into joining this close-knit society, but it's also really critical. It is a social death sentence to be rejected by them. Indeed, that is precisely what took place. Like clockwork, the scandal quickly swept through the little community, spreading beyond the church. You can only imagine my parents' reactions to this. I discovered further texts from my maternal side of the family ridiculing me further for upsetting and disrespecting their sister or daughter as a result of my small deed. I took your counsel at that moment and informed my family that they would no longer be involved in my life going forward. They might talk all they wanted, I made plain, but I wouldn't give a damn. Rather, they ought to be appreciative that I spared their spouses and employers from their offensive texts. I blocked all of them on everything, including the grandparents. I discovered a long note from my dad. He acknowledged that everything I had stated was accurate, expressed regret for not having the courage to confront my mother, and acknowledged that he was amazed at how much of my life he had lost as a result of her. He informed me that he was sick of being controlled and intended to file for divorce from her regardless of my choice. In addition, he said he wanted to get close to me in order to make up for the years we had missed. I responded to him by saying that I didn't want to see or forgive him just now. He replied that he loved me and would do all in his power to win me back. After responding that I didn't think that was credible, I blocked him as well. To be honest, his sleazy attempt to get out of the problem by blaming my mother was pitiful. At least she admitted to being cruel. However, he was limited to blaming others for his decisions. People like that are not what I want in my life. Along with the remainder of my maternal side, my mother and brother were barred. I blocked Mike as well since he continued to mock and disrespect me in his communications. My mother organized a self-pity party since she was rejected by her community and her marriage was failing. I said, "Good riddance." And then I blocked her as well. In order to help me, my grandfather chose to remain with us for a bit. He really is the greatest. Even though he won't acknowledge it, I can see that he is flattered by some of your remarks that he has read. A few days have gone by since, and nothing has happened. Lucas has been treating me like royalty, and I'm about to begin therapy. This is it, even though I know it's not the revenge-fueled, drama-filled update you were hoping for. If anything changes or develops, I'll keep you informed. I sincerely appreciate all of your love and support. Second story. The robot mop and the freeloading brother. Even though he never bought mop pads or utilized our robot mop, my freeloading brother stole it during one of his surreptitious trips. 7 years ago, my brother Chris, 27M, fictitious name, moved in with my boyfriend, 28M, and me, 26F. When he was sleeping in his car after being expelled from our childhood home due to drug addiction, we felt sorry for him. Chris and my boyfriend got along well at first. However, after a few years of cohabitation, Chris becomes withdrawn and aloof. I had to clean up after him while putting up with his pessimistic attitude after he quit completing chores. I informed Chris that he needed to locate another somewhere to live 6 months before the expiration of our contract. I believed we had decided to divide up the joint appliances and belongings when he finally moved out a few weeks before the lease expired. We didn't talk about our common robot mop, though. My grandmother offered it to the three of us when we were at her house years ago because she was no longer using it. Chris never helped maintain the little robot, even after we took it home. The mop was a simple gadget that you filled with cleaning solution and used with disposable mop pads. Chris, however, never switched it on or purchased new mop pads during the 4 years we owned it. My boyfriend or I were always in charge of it. We would all wake up to clean floors downstairs since I divided the cost of the mop pads and programmed the robot to run every night. Chris had been slowly transferring his belongings out for more than a month, so he hadn't returned his key. He would always arrive unexpectedly to collect boxes and personal items. At times, when we were out, we were unaware that he had been there. After giving it some thought and gathering many viewpoints, I sent Chris the following message. After giving it some thinking, I don't think the robot is yours. To help us get it home, I would love it if you could bring it to Thanksgiving. Over the years you've lived with us, we've been quite understanding, so stealing a shared appliance without asking is not only rude, but it also betrays a lack of regard for us. After years of utilizing and maintaining our robot without your assistance, we would like it returned because it belongs to us. Chris answered. Go ahead and bring that over when you get a moment. I've considered it too, and I also want Grandma's TV. Thank you. I answered. Additionally, the TV was given to us especially. Why you believe that to be yours as well is beyond me. Chris retorted. Apparently, I was handed everything. While I was in the kitchen, she asked if I wanted the robot, and I replied that I did. That was the course of events. The narrative is over. What you believe to be yours or not doesn't matter to me. It doesn't become yours just because I let you borrow something because I'm not using it. I retorted. We were all present when she made the proposition, as I recall. She insisted that it was a shared household item for all of us, even though I attempted to refuse because it was still functional. Before taking it while we were out, you ought to have spoken with us if you believed it to be yours. Chris answered. You don't recall correctly. I don't need to talk about my own belongings. In addition, my boyfriend was acting shadily by removing items from the tent while I was away in the hopes that I wouldn't notice. LOL. What's different about that? Since I've grown up and don't give a damn anymore, I didn't bring it up. I want to move on from this awful chapter of my life, and if you don't, I'll do the same to you. That's when I informed him. We believed our conversation with BF about dividing up things we had in common went well. You're acting immaturely, and I don't want someone in my life who can't have a basic discussion about things we have in common. Well, I suppose that's it. It appears that our little pal won't be returning. I provided an update a few days later. I wanted to express my gratitude to everyone who left a remark on my previous post. I read all of the comments and took into account all of the viewpoints. I felt empowered by your counsel to advocate for myself and demand the return of the robot. I mentioned my text exchange with Chris in my previous post's comments. In summary, I explained why the robot belonged to us and politely requested its return. Chris basically threatened to take me out of his life if I continued to bring it up since he couldn't see reason. My amazing boyfriend could no longer stand by and watch Chris treat us badly. For privacy considerations, I won't reveal the details of his private talk with Chris. But, following your advice, BF threatened to tell the family precise details if the robot wasn't returned by Thanksgiving. Chris had a week to decide as a result. I was getting ready to blow everyone away at family dinner after a calm week. On Wednesday night, however, I discovered a box on my front step as I walked outside to warm up my car. When I picked it up, I discovered it wasn't sealed, and I hadn't placed any orders. Our robot pal made it home. Guys! Chris must have determined that a mopping robot wasn't worth damaging his family's opinion of him. We want to maintain low or no contact moving ahead, and he will no longer be troubling us. Positively, BF and I have been checking on our pets with our new home monitoring cameras. It has made us very happy to watch our dogs and cats while we are alone at home. I'll leave a remark with a family photo of the robot and the pets. I appreciate your support, everyone.